Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we are going to be briefly revisiting the case and trial of Ezra McCandless, who we covered extensively last year. During our 6-part series looking into her case, we covered nearly everything that was associated with the crime, from Ezra's multiple police interviews, the body cam footage, and her testifying during the trial. However, there was one piece of media from the trial that we purposely left out of our coverage, with the intention of coming back to it sometime later on, and that was her long-term boyfriend, Jason Mengel's, testimony in court. In our research into the case, we found his time on the stand to be illuminating, as you could clearly see how being lied to and deceived for a significant period of time had affected Jason, a man who was over a decade older than her and worked in the National Guard. Our goal was always to revisit the case and cover his testimony, but we wanted to take a brief step away from the case before doing so. This story is one of the more contentious ones we've covered on the channel, and we wanted to make sure that we were covering this portion with the same amount of care as we did originally. With that said, if you missed our series on Ezra and want to be apprised of every detail in this case, a link will be left in the description box to go and watch all 6 parts if you so choose to. But as that would mean watching over 12 hours of video, I understand if that is not something you are willing to do. I will briefly summarize as much as possible in the next section of the video. That way you aren't left wanting. A timestamp will also be left in the description box down below for those who already know about the case. As with every other video we've done on this topic, the footage we are using comes from the channel Rottweiler Investigations here on YouTube. Their channel is a tremendous resource for myself, as well as other channels like this one, and they fully deserve your support. I'll be leaving a link to their channel, as well as the original uploads I've used in this video in the description box down below, and I highly encourage you to check them out. So with all of that said, let us begin. This is Ezra McCandless. She is a 20-year-old, out-of-work hipster who enjoyed photography and spending her days drinking free coffee at Racy's, a small coffee shop in the town of Eau Claire. She was extremely outgoing and would talk to anyone who came into the small shop, stating that everyone who went there was her buddy, mainly because she relied on them to purchase her coffees for her. This is Jason Mengel. Jason is 13 years older than Ezra, a fact that he contends she kept from him when they first began talking. Jason met Ezra at Racy's, and according to both of them, they quickly fell in love. Within the first month of dating, Ezra had moved out of her mother's home and into Jason's apartment with his roommate. Jason worked as a medic in the National Guard, meaning that every few months, he would have to leave for a couple weeks to go on assignment. Their relationship quickly became toxic, with both parties alleging that the other one was controlling. Ezra stated, Jason was controlling because he wanted her to help out with bills and believed she was inappropriately affectionate with her male friends. Meanwhile, Jason felt the relationship was toxic because if he hung out with someone Ezra didn't like, or thought they didn't like her, then she would accuse him of talking negatively about her, and say that she was going to physically harm herself and it would be his fault. This is John Hansen. All you need to know about him is that he is a close friend of Jason, and also frequented Racy's coffee shop. This is Alex Woodworth. Alex enjoyed philosophy, so much so that he spent all of his free time writing his own philosophical beliefs in his journal. He was the eldest of 4 children, and was described, by all who knew him, as being deeply empathetic and kind to those around him. He had never been physically violent with any person, and his past partners would describe him as quiet and caring. He was close to both Jason and Ezra, and Jason had been made uncomfortable with how extremely close he and Ezra were. And that was mainly because Alex and Ezra were also secretly dating, although Ezra told Jason that he had nothing to worry about and that she wasn't interested in Alex in a romantic way. The duo would often go on dates. She would sleep over at his house, and their romantic relationship had progressed to the point of saying I love you to each other. Alex wanted Ezra to break up with Jason, especially since she would tell him that Jason was cruel and uncaring towards her. But Ezra stated that if she broke up with him, she would lose all of her friends, and so they continued to date each other in secret. She had also begun sleeping with John Hansen. In February of 2018, Jason had gone away on a drill for the National Guard, and he had asked Hansen to check in with Ezra to make sure she was okay. He worried about her when he was gone, because she would often state she couldn't be alone without him, and while he was away, John and Ezra also began to sleep together. This relationship was seemingly spurred on by Ezra, who stated she had a crush on John. After Jason returned home from training, she sent John the following text messages. Working out again, dose really make you want to fuck everything that's moved. Are you going to pound this anytime soon? Just let me know when I get my next in and out winky face. Also hanging out and doing art again would be nice because you're more than a good dick. Great. Also, while Jason was away, Ezra moved out of their shared apartment because his roommate was expecting her to contribute to the housing costs in a more meaningful way. She would move back in with her mother, and whenever they would get into a fight, Jason would pay for her to stay a couple of nights in a hotel. That way she could unwind. One night, while staying in a hotel with Ezra, Jason went through her phone and found the messages between her and John. Obviously shocked that his best friend and girlfriend had been sleeping together, he confronted Ezra, who stated that she hadn't slept with John at all. When she saw he had proof, she changed her story, stating that yes, they had slept together, but the sex had not been consensual. Not knowing what to believe, but believing his girlfriend wouldn't lie to him, Jason encouraged Ezra to speak to the police about the matter, where she formally accused John of sexual assault. An investigation was then launched, but Ezra seemed uncooperative. When asked if the police could have access to the messages that she had sent John, ones where they had talked about their sexual encounter, Ezra stated that she deleted them. When the officers asked John, he willingly provided the messages, and they showcased a very one-sided relationship in which Ezra was incredibly eager to sleep with John and had enjoyed the times they had been intimate. She also claimed that she had told multiple friends about the incident and that they would back up her statement, but they found the opposite was true. Ezra had spoken to her other friends at Racy's about spending time with John that week, and after they had slept together, she said he was amazing, fun, considerate, and that she couldn't wait to see him again. She also said she loved spending time with his son. She had also spoken to Alex, who told the detectives that Ezra had talked to him in detail about having sex with John, and said, though it was consensual, she regretted it. The sexual assault case was later closed with no charges coming from it. After talking to the police, Jason was confused. He didn't know if Ezra was telling the truth, and he felt like the last 8 months of his life had been a lie. 2 of his closest friends had betrayed him, and they had lied to his face for weeks after sleeping with the person he thought he was going to marry. He didn't know who he could trust, so he asked Ezra for some distance. They didn't break up, but he didn't want anything to do with her for a short while. But Ezra was more engaged in their relationship than ever. She wrote him multiple times a day, telling him that she loved him deeply and would have never done anything to hurt him. She accused John and Alex of manipulating her and sexually exploiting her, and stated that if she hadn't been so confused by them, she never would have cheated. She began to show up at places she knew he would be, casually running into him and bringing him her journals, declaring her unending, ancient love to him. And although Jason tried to keep his boundaries, he once again began to sleep with her. On March 21st, the pair were talking, with Jason stating he didn't know if he could properly move forward with a relationship as he couldn't get the idea of her sleeping with his 2 close friends out of his head. She encouraged him to think of positive thoughts until those images were out of his head, and then informed him that she intended to see Alex the very next day. When Jason became confused and angry with the concept of her meeting up with the man she had spent months cheating on him with, the man who had apparently sexually exploited and manipulated her, she tried to placate him, saying she was only seeing him in order to tell him off for what he had done, but Jason didn't buy it. He had recently been made aware of how deep Ezra's relationship with Alex was, with one of their mutual friends telling him that Alex and Ezra had stated they loved each other and would spend all their time together, and now hearing that she wanted to spend time alone with him, he felt that he couldn't trust her. He told her that he didn't want to speak to her anymore, and stopped replying to her texts. The next day, the former couple would run into each other, coincidentally, at Racy's. Ezra stated she was going to be finding her own apartment soon and moving back to the small town, but she seemed disheveled and strange. That morning marked the first time she had ever paid for her own coffee, and left a tip as well. After leaving the coffee shop, she went to Alex's home to talk. Their conversation had been interrupted by Jason, who wanted to make sure his ex was safe, and he told the pair if they wanted to continue talking, they should do it somewhere public. Directly after, Ezra and Alex got into her car and drove off. 4 hours later, Ezra was found on 88-year-old Dawn Sippel's farm, covered in mud and blood. The word boy had been cut into her arm. She claimed she'd been attacked, but didn't know by whom. She was also going by her birth name, Monica J. When she was brought to the hospital and evaluated by doctors, they found that she was mostly unharmed, with an exception of a few scratches and superficial cuts that seemed to be self-inflicted. Detectives talked to her about what had happened, but she maintained she had no idea. She was then informed that Alex and her car were still missing, and they told her that if she knew anything, they needed to know as soon as possible so they could potentially save Alex's life. But she said nothing. The following day, the police would find Ezra's car, with Alex's dead body hanging halfway out of it. He'd been stabbed 16 times in the neck, face, chest, and groin, and it appeared as if the scene had been staged. There were drag marks, indicating that whoever killed Alex had tried to pull him out of the backseat of the vehicle, but had given up halfway through. The scene also indicated that the majority of the attack happened outside of the car, with Alex trying to seek refuge inside the vehicle. Armed with this information, the detectives went to speak with Ezra again, and her story changed. She still maintained that she didn't know what happened to Alex, or what happened to her in general, but she said she remembered some things. Firstly, she told them that it had been Alex who carved the word boy into her arm. She claimed that he often ridiculed her for having identified as a male previously, and would use the term, as well as male pronouns, derogatorily towards her. Secondly, she also claimed that at some point during the drive, Alex had taken the wheel as she began to have a panic attack. And finally, she claimed that all she could really remember of the attack was feeling scared of Alex, like he had hurt her. The detectives then told Ezra that they had found Alex's body, and that they knew she was lying about not remembering anything, and she stated they were right, and then completely changed her story again. She claimed that Alex had driven her to the muddy road and gotten them stuck in the mud. While she attempted to get them out of the pickle they were in, he attempted to sexually assault her, and she killed him to save her life. The officers then told her that the details of her story still didn't align with the evidence, and that the way she claimed Alex had carved the word into her arm still didn't make any sense. Again, she admitted that she had lied about that too, and that after she had killed Alex, she then blacked out, then had woken up in the back of her car. Ezra then claimed that after realizing what had happened, she wanted to remember what happened, so she carved the word boy into her arm so she wouldn't forget. She was then promptly arrested.
Can you please state your full name and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter, please?
Jason, Leemengel.
It's Jason Lee Mengel.
Yes, Roger.
Where do you work?
Before we properly begin, we should note how Ezra is staring at Jason at the beginning of this footage. It's clear as day that she is still visibly in love with this man. She is staring at him with such intensity it's inappropriate, given where they are. She is still trying to hold back a smile early on, gazing at him as if he has hung the stars for her, which is strange, as he is testifying against her in a murder trial. However, there are two very noteworthy things here. The first being when she stares at him before putting her glasses on. Eye contact can be an extremely powerful thing, and the fact that she is at the very least attempting to do that is telling. She wants him to look at her, to note that she is listening to everything he is saying, which she knows isn't going to be complimentary towards her, and she wants him to think about how that will affect her. Throughout their fraught relationship, Ezra would use her mental health and well-being to manipulate Jason. She would state that if he were going to hang out with friends without her or leave her for any amount of time, that she would harm herself. She was constantly in a state of disrepair, claiming that only he could help her. She's hoping that Jason remembers his obligation to her and will do what he always did and protect her. Secondly, pay attention to what she is wearing, because it's incredibly well thought out. Ezra's legal team advised her to appear as meek and feminine as possible, with the hopes that presenting her as a soft, frail young woman would lessen the impact of the murder she committed. They wanted people to look at her and assume that she wouldn't be able to hurt a fly, simply based on how she looked. She was given a wardrobe that consisted mainly of soft, muted colors close to white, and grew out her hair for the trial. However, there's one thing that she's wearing that doesn't match the prompt that she was given, and that is the forest green sweater that she is cuffed under her pink blazer. That sweater belonged to Jason, and he gave it to her after she had attacked Alex while she was in the hospital. The sweater is somewhat obscured now, but Ezra purposely tries to bring Jason's attention to it by cleaning her glasses using the sweater material. She wants him to feel the same way he did when he believed she had been assaulted by Alex. She wanted him to view her as someone who needed to be protected, and by wearing the sweater he gave to her, she is hoping to remind him of those feelings. Later on, after he had testified for a bit, and she realized that he wasn't doing what she wanted, she would take her pink blazer off entirely, and brazenly call attention to the sweater. In the article, Pretty in Pink, the DA says murder suspect, quote, put on a show, unquote, at trial, by Paul Rosa. Mengel commented on seeing the sweater, stating, it was emotional to see the games never stopped. It was deliberate. Ezra definitely wore that to get a response out of me. It was just shocking, he said. I don't understand what her tactic was, but I definitely felt uneasy. It just felt like more of the emotional manipulation I had been put through. I definitely felt like she thought that showing that to me, like, this is how much I still love you. Unquote. We are less than 20 seconds into Jason's testimony. His face has yet to be shown on screen, and so much subtle manipulation has already transpired.
At the moment, I was working for FedEx, but I'm going on a deployment to the Ukraine, so
you're
guess
not
the Army owns me.
you're currently taking a leave?
I took the month off.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said you're going on a deployment to Ukraine. What's your military status?
I'm on Title 10 right now, I believe.
Are you a medic in the military?
Roger, yeah.
And just because I don't use Roger in my normal
Oh, yes,
course of
Yes.
work, that's a yes, correct?
Yes,
Thank you. How long have you been in the military as a medic?
it's going on like 10, 12 years-ish.
Jason hasn't said anything of note yet. However, I wanted to discuss his general behavior so far on the stand. He's fidgeting, moving himself back and forth in his chair, indicating that he is likely extremely uncomfortable, which is normal. It would be stranger if he was completely rigid while being questioned in his ex-girlfriend's murder trial. But what should also be noted is that he is actively trying to avoid looking at Ezra. When she looks straight ahead, or to the left of the screen, he is looking at the prosecution and the attorney questioning him. But when he looks at the right of the screen, he is looking at the defense and at Ezra. Ezra was staring so intently at him that if he were to glance that way, he would no doubt meet her eyes, and every time that occurs, he becomes more anxious. The pair didn't date for a long period of time. He hadn't seen her in over a year, but her mere presence would be enough to put the medic on edge. She had lied to him the entire time they were together, about small things that didn't matter, and larger things that would color the way he viewed her forever. She tried to turn his friends against her, claiming that he had an anger issue and she needed to escape his tyranny, as well as cheating on him with two of his close friends. And then, as a last-ditch effort to try and rekindle their relationship, she killed the person he considered to be a friend. So much as looking at her causes psychological distress from Jason.
Does that require some travel, both in the United States as well as outside of the country?
Just travel. It's mostly like stateside lately, relief efforts and things like that.
And how old are you?
I am 35? April 6, 84. We'll say that.
April 6, 84. And what city or municipality are you initially from?
Initially from?
Yes.
I guess you could say initially we could do Medford, Wisconsin?
Medford,
the Taylor
Wisconsin.
County area.
And just generally, what city do you live in currently?
Currently, Eau Claire County.
And in the time period from the summer of 2017 through March of 2018, were you living in the city of Eau Claire?
In what time frame?
September 2017 through March 2018.
Yes.
Are you familiar with a place, Racy's Coffee Shop?
Yes.
Is that a place that you have frequented as a customer?
Oh, yeah, I go there quite frequently.
Okay. Is that a place that you frequented as a customer from that same time period, summer 2017 to March 2018?
Yeah, about pretty much every day.
And if you could describe for the jury a little bit about the clientele at Racy's, and I'll ask you some specific questions. Is it more of an artsy place, or is it more of a sports bar? What's the typical clientele?
It's kind of like an intersection of like all people. So we have, veterans, we have motorcycle guys, we have liberals, we have Democrats, Republicans, like everybody. It's kind of like a melting pot where everyone just goes and sits on the benches and they have conversations in an open forum. And it's a very understanding place where people are free thinkers and there's no recourse like for your thought.
Is it, by the name Racy's Coffee Shop, is coffee the main product sold there?
I mean, yeah, they have coffee, but there's also the nucleus, which serves food. But
So is that connected to?
they're connected inside, yeah.
Would it be common or uncommon for me to walk into Racy's and see somebody with a philosophy book or a journal?
No. Students go there a lot to study, so
So that would be common?
yeah, very common.
Is it a place that you would go to just grab a cup of coffee and head out, like maybe at Starbucks, or is it a place you'd go and, like you said, sit on the bench?
It's a place for procrastination, I think. A lot of people go there with intentions of like studying or But it's like a unified procrastination. It's kind of like, it makes it okay. So we can indulge in our vices. Like, people go there to smoke, and they really shouldn't be just, because it's communal. So like, you all,
Is it a lot of the same regular customers and regular employees when you go there?
I mean, there's like monthly people that come like once or twice a month, but there's definitely daily. Like, they call themselves, or we call like Racy's rats, pretty much. Just like
The Racy's rats?
pretty much just like hanging out at the coffee shop.
And you said smoke cigarettes. Does that happen out on the bench?
Yeah, the benches are kind of like, that's where people like wax poetic and stuff like that. And
What?
the what?
What did I hear you said? If you what you said.
For which part?
You said, the benches are, that's for people, and then I don't know what you said.
Like wax poetic, like just like people will go on rants about Trump, or they'll go on rants about anything, just about anything. Like, I talk a lot about bikes out there because I'm very pro
I'm sorry,
biking.
I talk about what?
Bicycling. I talk a lot about bicycling out there because I'm very pro. I don't know. I'm an enthusiast for cycling, so.
So it's a place where if you're going to have a smoke, you step outside, sit on the bench, and have a conversation.
Yeah, and everyone gives each other their fair, order for the conversation.
Would you describe, speaking more of the regulars, the dailies, is it a close-knit group of people, or are there cliques?
Sorry. Yeah, exceptionally close. Like, there's been a lot in people's lives at that place that people have experienced through each other. So, losses of friends, family members, people that move away, marriages, things like that. Like, yeah, it's always sad to see someone go somewhere else, like someone move to Portland or someone move,
Is it like the coffee cheers kind of place?
You could equivalent it to that, yeah.
Now, did you know Alexander Woodworth?
Yeah, he was a nighttime barista mostly, sometimes daytime shifts, but.
So you would see him at Racy's?
Yeah, I would get off work pretty late, so a lot of times if I was coming back into town, he would be running the night shift, so.
And John Hanson, was he somebody that you would see at Racy's as well during that time period?
Yeah, we were very close.
Now, Ezra McCandless, are you familiar with her?
Yes,
Is the person you know as Ezra McCandless in the courtroom today?
yes.
Can you identify where she's located by just describing a general area and then an item of clothing, please?
Pink blazer to my left.
At the table to
The
my
first table, yes.
right?
Yep.
I'd ask the record reflect identification of the defendant by this witness.
The record will reflect that the witness has identified Ms. McCandless.
Now, was the defendant part of the Racy's crowd?
Yeah, like I met her there, and she was sort of inducted into it through, like, she was away from her family, so it was kind of like a close-knit family, so I think she just needed a strong center for a little while.
And what was your, speaking of the summer 2017 to into early 2018, what was your relationship with the defendant?
I can't recall exactly when we started.
Were you dating during that general time period?
It was like right after Eau Claire's festival, kind of. I ran into her there.
In 2017?
I believe so.
And I'm not familiar with the Eau Claire's festival. Was that during the summer?
Yeah, I think it was during maybe August, July, somewhere around there.
And when does it sound accurate that early February 2018 would have been the end of your relationship with the defendant?
It sounds good. I mean, I wrote out a timeline at one point when I've repressed a lot of this stuff, so the times are like not very kosher with me anymore.
That sounds generally accurate, though?
It sounds generally accurate.
If you were to write a timeline of Ezra and Jason's relationship, it was incredibly short. They weren't together for years. They barely managed a few months. But the impact this relationship had on both of their lives was immeasurable. Saving her relationship with Jason was the main driving force behind Ezra falsely accusing both John Hanson and Alex Woodworth of sexual assault, and she would go on to take a man's life in cold blood in order to support her lies. But for Jason, he was put through a significant amount of psychological trauma by Ezra. At the onset of their relationship, she manipulated him and placed him in a sort of savior position. She presented herself as an intelligent but desperate person who people often took advantage of. Ezra told Jason that her parents were controlling, that she desperately needed her independence, and he gallantly stepped in. Anytime she was employed, she discussed how her bosses were rude or cruel towards her, and if conflict came up with anyone she knew, she was never at fault. And at the beginning, Jason would state that he enjoyed the position. He liked helping her because he thought everything she was saying was true. But as time went on, her lies got more and more elaborate, and he was placed in a position where he no longer knew what the truth was. Add to the fact that Ezra had turned some people in his life, people he had known before Ezra, against him through accusing him of heinous actions. The person he had loved more than anyone, and that he had tried to take care of, was working against his best interests the entire relationship. Everything that occurred between them for those months was a lie. Every interaction he had with Ezra was a charade, and even looking back at that time would be difficult for him to do, because he would no longer trust that he could accurately assess what occurred.
Now, is there an age difference between you and the defendant?
Yes. I did not know as large when I started, but
And when you say you didn't know it was that large when you started, did you think she was older than she actually is?
I thought she was older, and there were like strange, like, I noticed on a random, I noticed a tassel, like a high school tassel from like your hat hanging in the car the first time we had met. And then I was going to look and see what year that said, and it was gone like the next time I met her. So I was like, But like, yeah, like I think it was like she never mentioned her age, but like I had heard like her life stories, so like I was assuming at that age.
And if you're 35-ish now,
Yeah.
would she be about 13 to 15 years younger?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Now, what city or municipality is the defendant from, if she ever told you?
I think she resided, she was in Stanley, I believe, living with her mother and father, but she was supposed to be, I'm not sure if she was residing in Marionette, I'm not sure how to pronounce.
But originally her family's from
The Stanley area. Yeah, I think she was going to college up there, but she was back.
And looking at the time period when you first met, so after the Eau Claire days in 2017, can you describe, or where did you first meet the defendant?
Where did I first meet her?
Yes.
I got a flat coming into town after work, right by Just Local Foods. So I walked my bike back to Racy's. Alex Woodworth was there. He was working the night shift, and pounded on the door because he would lock up. But a lot of times, if like you made an effort, he would just give you. I mean, they toss most of the coffee out. So he opened the door, said we're closed, gave me a coffee in a to-go cup, and then.
And where did you go once he gave you the coffee?
I sat down on the bench and kind of let out a huff, like a sigh, and she popped up. She was laying down so like I was on like the furthest to the left bench. She was on like the right bench, laying down.
And when you say she, you're talking about the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. Was she using the Wi-Fi there, if you know?
Yeah, she was using the Wi-Fi.
And what do you know about, did the defendant have a cell phone that had service, or did she need to be connected to Wi-Fi?
She didn't have service on her phone, and those like I am saying she, but at that moment when I met Ezra, I did not know whether she was binary, non-binary, male, female. Okay. But I recognized a female, and I think we actually maybe had a conversation about it at that time. But
okay, so
I don't know if there's a way that they would like me to refer to pronouns.
We'll refer to Mr. McCandless as the defendant. And,
okay, that works.
And that's how I'll refer to her.
Jason's testimony is interesting here, because despite the fact that he knows, definitely, that she is lying, he still wants to show her respect. Most people who would take the stand against their ex would not do the same, but Jason shows an incredible amount of decorum in this moment. I point this out because moments like this matter in a jury trial. Ezra's main defense is that she was brutalized by Alex. She is being unfairly penalized by the justice system, and that, again, the majority of people in her life were actively abusive towards her. Even Jason. Her claims against him had come up in court, and she stood by them. but he is still considerate towards her. This action would ingratiate him to the jury. They would have been shown her lies repeatedly, but most of the people she directly accused could not or would not participate in the trial, with Jason being one of the only ones who would. His personality and behavior is being monitored by the jury, and they likely would not believe a man who was concerned about how to appropriately conduct himself in court would also treat her the way she claimed.
So you grabbed a coffee from Alex, Alex shut the door, you sat down, and the defendant popped up off a different bench, is that right?
Yes.
And did you start talking?
Yeah, we talked. I'm not entirely sure what we talked about, but we talked for quite a while.
So you drank some coffee, smoked some cigarettes, I assume?
I mean, I was drinking coffee. I don't think she had any with her, but
Okay.
smokes. And I think she didn't actually smoke back then, but she might have bummed one.
And then you just kind of hung out? Was it into the early morning, or do you not remember?
The sun wasn't coming up yet, but I eventually went home, and I didn't think we were going to ever see, like, we talked a little bit about art and stuff, so she had followed me on Instagram, or we had, like, exchanged Instagram information, and I thought that was kind of it, because under my impression, she was just there for the Eau Claire Festival, and I didn't expect to see her again.
And when was it in relation to that first meeting that you started dating the defendant?
I would say within 2 weeks, maybe. I'm not.
That's an approximation?
I have a date written down at some point, but I think it was like in July at some point when we actually made it like we're going to be dating. July 6th kind of makes sense to me for some reason.
And that would be 2017?
Roger. Or yes. Yeah.
And did the defendant eventually move in with you?
She moved in.
Approximately how long after you started dating did she move in?
Relatively quickly. I mean, I asked my roommate if it would be okay. Things weren't so good on her home front. It seemed like she was having trouble getting back into school. And I was like, well, if you want to work, you want to pick up a job, work here, split went through ways, that works for me, you know?
Ezra's home life was fine. Her parents, though separated, both were fine with her staying in their homes, but simply asked her to either get a job or go to school, which Ezra would describe as being incredibly controlling. She actively disparaged her family to Jason, again placing him in the role of the savior. More notably, within the span of 4 weeks, Ezra and Jason went from strangers to him asking her to move in, and from the very beginning, she was lying to him.
Do you think it was a couple weeks, a month, approximately, after you first started dating?
It was fairly soon. I mean, Alex seemed my roommate, Alex Zink, seemed very surprised that it happened so fast, but we all seemed to like her, and she seemed to be part of the group, so.
And that brings me, so there's Alexander Woodworth, and then there's Alex Zink, right?
Yes, my roommate at the time was Alexander Zink,
And
Alexander Woodworth.
Two different people.
Two different people, yes.
Alex Zink, is the last name Zink?
Yes.
Okay. And did he, or during that time period, did he have a girlfriend who also lived there?
Jenna, I don't think, was living there at the time. Jenna was still, I believe, living with Elon and Dieter McCallum, I believe. Elon and Dieter McCallum, I believe.
And Jenna is that Jenna Van de Zand?
Van de Zand, yep.
If she wasn't living there, did she eventually move in?
She eventually moved in, yes.
That's Jenna?
Yep.
Okay. So for a time, it sounds like it was for sure you, Alex, and the defendant, and then Jenna at some point
I
moved
think we
in?
were all four residing there at one time. I believe so.
Were there certain arrangements made for rent?
It was like a verbal contract, and I mean, it's not like I don't know how you would put it. It was more of a verbal, like me and Alex had the rent, and then the idea was that she would find an occupation of some sort. I think she started working at Joann Fabrics, and just like kick in what she could. But
Ezra never worked at Joann Fabrics. She lied and pretended to get a job to seem as if she were more productive than she really was. She carried out this lie by leaving during the day for some hours and hanging out where she knew Jason wouldn't find her.
we were all trying to help her get back into school or do something with her art because she was really involved in the art community. And I mean, it's not like we were going to like put her on the street.
So there was a a loose understanding the defendant would kick in, whether it was utilities or rent.
Yeah.
Did she ever kick in for those?
I think she did at one point for a little bit, but I think times were kind of tough and she had to take part of it back.
To be clear, times were never tough for Ezra. I do not mean to sound harsh or to be unfair to the young woman, but reading into the case and looking into her life, it's clear that she would abuse the kindness of others in her life. And once they put their foot down with her, she would move on to the next person. Ezra had people in her life who routinely saw the good in her, offered her free food, housing, and employment, and she actively rejected those offers because she did not want to work. She wanted to be taken care of, first and foremost, and the very idea that she would have to do anything to earn her keep was absurd to her. During the trial, multiple former friends, teachers, and colleagues remarked that they had offered her jobs, and that she had turned them down time and time again. Times were not hard for Ezra. She just didn't want to do the things every other person is asked to do when they become an adult.
You said she worked at Joann Fabrics. Do you know, was that a full-time job or less than full-time?
I don't know if she was full, it was quite a few hours because it was during the seasonal time, so I'm not sure if she was hired on as seasonal help or if she was hired on as part-time, but was working like full-time hours, but she was gone pretty often for like, I'd say about a month or so. I mean, she was like very optimistic like during that period.
Did you get a feel, or did she ever tell you if she had lots of money or if she was struggling?
I kind of knew she was not doing the greatest, but like she was always fairly charitable. Like around the holiday season, she spent a lot more on us than I thought she probably should have, which, I mean, was appreciated because it is the holidays, but at the same time, I was hoping she would look out for herself.
Did the defendant have a car?
She had a silver Impala.
In that silver Impala, did it have some drawings on it?
Yeah, she painted it. The top had a bird. I think it's a shrike on a bike.
So I want to focus on the time period of when the defendant moved in with you and Alex, and then Jenna was there as well. Was your relationship roommates, or, and I'm specifically talking about you and the defendant, was it roommates or were you intimate? What was the general nature of the relationship?
It was intimate.
Okay. Were you exclusive, at least as far as
Yes.
you knew?
Yeah, I was exclusive.
So you weren't seeing anyone else?
No.
Did you think she was seeing anyone else?
What time period are we talking about?
Let's say up until, from the time she moved in until the end of 2017.
I'd say pretty confident
Okay. Confident that she wasn't seeing anyone?
that she wasn't seeing anyone.
Did you see each other daily?
Yeah, I mean, we lived together in passing sometimes, usually at the coffee shop, usually, at home, depending on what day it was. I mean, I was working weird hours, but
How would you communicate if you weren't just crossing paths or at the house together? Would you call, text, Instagram?
yeah, I don't know if she had a texting app at that point. She had used a Text Now app or something at one point, but it was mostly just Facebook Messenger and Instagram for the most part.
Without getting into your personal finances or anything like that, did you provide certain things for the defendant, meaning food, money for gas, anything like that?
Judge, I'm going to object. I think this is really getting far afield. Their financial affairs. I don't think money is an issue in this case.
This objection is strange, but her lawyer is trying to work a fairly indefensible case, so it makes sense. Money is absolutely a factor in this case, as it shows how very little Ezra was actually responsible for. She got by, so to speak, through the goodwill of others. She wanted to be a radical bohemian artist who was so free that they did things like paint their car with birds and spent the majority of their day in a small coffee shop. Had she been funding that life for herself, that would say nothing about her character. But the fact that she actively manipulated the people in her life to do that for her, it's indicative to the jury that she is someone who cannot be trusted with the truth, even over something as simple as where she gets her money.
I'm going to overrule Well, you may answer. Go ahead.
I mean, we provided, so like, I would say that it was becoming a little financially straining because me and Alex, I didn't want it to ruin our friendship financially because he felt like with the situation.
Object to him testifying as to what his roommate Alex
Stain,
felt.
what,
I'll ask a follow-up question to clarify. Were you paying rent and not getting contributions from the defendant?
Yes, I was paying rent but not getting contributions.
Okay. Were you emotionally invested in each other?
Yes, very much.
Did you say I love you back and forth?
Often.
Did you have a certain tagline for Instagram messages or?
A tagline? A thing that we would say often?
When you'd say goodbye, was there anything specific you'd say?
Yes.
So you are loved and you are valued?
Yes, yep, sorry.
And would that go back and forth?
Very
You would
often.
say it to her, she'd say it to you?
Yes.
Did you ever meet the defendant's family?
Oh, yeah. I met them on a very auspicious occasion, but yes.
Did that include her mother, her father, grandparents?
Yes, she had a very large family. I only realized that once I started meeting them all that there was, a lot of personalities in the house.
And did she introduce you to them?
I met her mother initially at the clinic after her car accident, and then I kind of, through that, met everybody else. I didn't know how to meet them with the age gap. I didn't know if it would be awkward or weird, so I wasn't opposed to it, but it kind of came at a strange time, and she seemed to trust me quite a bit because she stayed at the hospital, finished up stuff, and then I drove Ezra back to their place.
Was it a relationship where you would go to family functions, whether it was a holiday or a picnic?
Yeah, from time to time. I wasn't always privy to that kind of stuff because I'm not much of a holiday person, but she would ask me, and I was always welcomed, whether it was Christmas, Thanksgiving, anything.
Were you close enough that you had at least some of her family members' phone numbers in your phone?
Yes, I had a few of them.
What were some of and we'll just briefly touch on this, what were some of the things that you and the defendant would do in your free time? You mentioned biking. Is that something that you
Yeah,
shared?
I bike a lot.
Did you and the defendant bike together?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I built her up a bike.
Did you go hiking, get coffee, things like that?
Go hiking, get coffee. Photo walks once in a while. I wasn't really into photography, but she was very into photography.
And I assume, were there some ups and downs in your relationship?
There always is, yeah.
But there were times when you certainly were happy.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Your Honor, if I may approach?
You may.
What's the number going to be?
I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit 684.
All right.
Do you recognize the people in these photographs?
Yeah, that's me.
Is that you and the defendant?
Yes, me and Ezra.
Okay, and is that a series of photographs taken during your relationship?
Yes.
Okay. I would move Exhibit 684 into evidence and ask for permission to publish briefly.
Any objection?
No.
All right, Exhibit 284 will be received.
684. If I said 284, I apologize.
684?
Now, Mr. Mengel, those are...
When the camera pans back to Ezra, we can see her dab her eyes with a Kleenex, mimicking crying over the pictures of them being shown. But her face is entirely straight and she continues to stare holes into Jason. Other than the Kleenex, there are no indications of tears, or that she is actually overcome with emotion in this instance. Her eyes are not bloodshot or glassy. Her makeup appears to be unmoved, and oftentimes, when a person wearing glasses cries, some condensation appears on them. None of that is present here, though it's always possible that she was emotionally moved by the photos of them in happier times. This likely is another manipulation on her part. Jason is talking about their lives together, the beginning of their relationship, and everything he had done to take care of her. And, in an effort for him to do it again, she mimes tears. She wants him to feel badly for her, to think she has gone through enough, and seems deliberately focused on making him see her emotions.
Obviously photographs of one of the happy times, right?
Yeah, just on the couch goofing around.
Okay. During your relationship with the defendant, was there ever talk about a future between the two of you?
Yeah, we meshed very well. Like, I thought that there was probably some type of future, and yeah, like it was, initially it was very good.
Was there ever talk about potential marriage at some point?
I think we joked about it quite a bit. Like, it was kind of like a running trend. I don't think we took it super, super seriously, but we had, I would like call her my wife once in a while just for fun. She'd call me her husband.
In a flirtatious kind of way?
Yeah.
Did you ever talk about having children together?
No.
At some point early on in your relationship, did the defendant get pregnant?
Yes.
And that was pregnant by you?
I do not know, like, who's...
This is a normal question, especially considering that she had cheated on him with two of his closest friends, but Ezra seems to find the assertion that Jason would not think the baby is his to be a slight, which is strange because she's on trial for murder and he's testifying against her. You would assume that 1, she either has more pressing concerns than whether her ex believes the baby is his, and 2, him testifying at all is a bigger slight. But that didn't seem to matter to her. If we compare how she stares at him here to how she stared at him when he took the stand, the change is clear. This is Ezra when she's very mad.
As far as you know, there's no reason.
At the time I was assuming that.
You were in a sexual relationship with her in that time period, correct?
Yes.
And as far as you know, it was at that point it was a.
As far as I know, it was exclusive at that point.
Okay.
Yes.
And was that in the September-October time period in 2017?
I believe so. I think it was right before her birthday.
When is her birthday, if you remember?
October 6th.
Okay.
I believe.
And it would have been 2017 because that's the time period that you were dating, right?
Yes, we were dating.
How did you find out that the defendant was pregnant?
Well, I kept trying to talk her into going into the clinic because she was she was vomiting a lot. She seemed really sick, lethargic. She wasn't putting on any weight. And I thought she had mono or something. So she was like, well, I don't have insurance. I don't have the money for this. I don't want to go in. And I was like, you need to go in because, this is just like medic Jason talking. Like, I'm worried for you. You shouldn't be puking this much. And we went in and she got one of the baseline tests they do is a pregnancy test.
And she was told she was pregnant?
Yes.
Did the defendant shortly thereafter have an abortion?
Yes.
Did you and the defendant ever discuss whether or not she would have an abortion?
Not really verbally. It was kind of at when they told her that she was pregnant. I didn't say anything, and she's asked for paperwork, and I'm
Judge,
operating.
I'd like to approach the bench.
So, Mr. Mengel, I'll ask a different question, same area. So, is it fair that you didn't have much of a verbal conversation about whether or not the defendant would have an abortion?
I'm under the understanding that it's the woman's choice. So, like, when the actions were started, I just stepped back and let what happened happen because.
So there wasn't a real conversation about.
No, I wasn't going to tell her what to do.
You certainly didn't pressure her to have one, correct?
No.
And the abortion that eventually happened in Minnesota, is that right?
Yes.
And you drove her to the clinic, or you went with her at least?
I went with her. Yes.
And you paid for the abortion?
Yes.
And when you got to the clinic, she told you that she didn't want you at the clinic, correct?
Yeah, it was very strange because I didn't know. I mean, it was a very surreal situation for me in general, but I thought that she would want me there for support, but then she told me that she just wanted, she didn't want me to see her like this or any of that. So I was understanding, and I kind of just hopped on a bus and bummed around town.
So you just kind of rode the buses
Rode the buses, bummed around, yeah.
and eventually went back to the clinic?
Yeah, after I got a message from her.
Prior to the abortion, you mentioned that your relationship was intimate. Was that, did intimacy change after the abortion?
Yeah, it was very minimal.
Would you, and I should have asked this earlier, the sleeping arrangements up to that point, when she first moved into the apartment, did you share a room
Yep, we shared a room.
and shared a bed?
Yes.
After the abortion, did you end up sleeping on the couch or on the floor?
I slept on the couch quite a bit. It was just hard on me.
And would the defendant sleep in the bed?
Yeah, she would try to coax me upstairs, and I just wasn't emotionally ready for it.
So the couch was in a different room altogether?
Downstairs, yeah.
Now, shortly after, or sometime within the months after the abortion, did you take a trip to California?
Yeah, I went with my friend Josh. And
Where in California did you go?
well, we flew into Detroit first, then we went to San Francisco, took the Redwood Coastal Transit up to Arcata. It's like where the redwoods are.
What was or how long were you gone approximately?
About a week.
And what was the purpose of the trip?
He had some stressful things in his life at that moment, and I had a lot of stress. And I think, but we had talked about it at the coffee shop, and Ezra was supportive. She's like, we've all been through a lot, and the redwoods is like a place of like growth, and there's all this beauty and plants and stuff. So maybe going there would help me recenter myself and being out in an environment besides Eau Claire, because Eau Claire is a great town to miss. It's a good place to come home to sometimes. It can get a little too much sometimes.
Now, was that November, December time period, or?
It sounds about right.
Okay.
I have dates written down somewhere, but I've repressed a lot of this stuff. It's been
And
hard.
at some point, you actually created a little bit of a timeline. Well, I'll come back to that. I want to go ahead a little bit we'll talk about January into February of 2018. Are you familiar with the game Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh yeah, D&D.
And you said D&D?
Yeah, D&D.
Okay. If you could explain for the jury what just generally that is.
You roll dice. It's kind of like a game of chance, but like I'm saying like a lot. It's improv with your friends. So you create a character, you go to a place, and someone runs the whole session, and the rest of the players, create like whatever, a bard or a cleric or something, and like the whole idea is to like get you involved, and like Josh, who ran the campaigns, he would create these environments for your personality, your character to like go through.
So is it just a social, like people getting together to play a board game kind of thing?
There's nothing like digital about it. It's just, a board, or not really even a board. It's just like they'll do like a map so we can draw out where we're doing things or what's going on. And sometimes tokens. It's mostly just a chance to like play a make-believe with your friends again. So it's kind of fun.
Was that a kind of a getaway for you?
Yeah, we did that on Monday nights.
Was that a regular Monday night thing?
For quite a while, yes. Yeah.
Did the defendant ever get in the way of you going to those Monday night events?
There were times. I mean, I thought it would help her, so I kind of inducted her into the group to like, kind of push Josh to like let her play too, because I thought maybe a little fantasy and like something would get her out of character and like her life for a little while. But she didn't like the numbers so much in the game, and she always kind of felt like she wasn't doing as good, or she couldn't pretend as good as people. So she stopped coming, and then there were a few times where I don't know if she just didn't want me to go because she was worried I was going to talk bad about her or something, but like she would find a reason to try to make me stay.
And was there a regular reason that she would give you to try to make you stay?
She would get manic at some times and threaten like self-harm.
So she
We've stated this before, but that is abuse. If someone is using self-harm or the threat of suicide as a tool to get you to stay with them, not leave an area, or do something you already stated you do not want to do, they are abusing you. The pressure that a threat like this can place on a person is incredible, as they now feel like someone's very existence depends on their compliance. And when you are in that sort of situation, it can feel like you have no other options than to do what they want. If you are in that sort of situation where a person is telling you that they are going to harm themselves because of your actions, the best thing you can do for them is just to try and get them help. Take their threat seriously, even if you don't think they are going to go through with it, because it provides them with resources and it protects you in the long run. Of course, there are instances where that person will react negatively to emergency services being called, but for your own protection, they should be. Although saying that much is easier than doing it in the moment. Jason was in his 30s when this happened. He worked as a medic in the National Guard. On paper, it would seem that he should have known what to do. But when you're in that sort of environment, trying to keep the person you love alive, being made to feel as if it is your fault they're feeling this way, it can be borderline impossible to know what to do. Again, her home situation was optimal, given that she was a young adult who wanted to be treated as such by her parents, but they committed the cardinal sin against Ezra, which was asking her to act and behave the way all adults do. Every time someone would give her the slightest bit of pushback, tell her that they loved her and supported her, but thought that she should get a job and stop getting by on the goodwill of others, she would then frame them negatively towards those in her life. Suddenly, both of her parents were extremely controlling. Suddenly, her former close friend was a conniving little bitch, and so on. If you don't give Ezra the answer she wanted, she felt justified in claiming you had harmed her in some way. It was almost as if she didn't think her words held any meaning, or that her relationships with people were entirely expendable. When people behave in this manner, a few issues arise. Firstly, you can never have someone in your life for too long, because they will begin to question your narrative. Take, for example, what Jason is saying here. He states that Ezra told him that her home life was not optimal, that her parents were controlling, and that their relationship was so fraught that within a few weeks of knowing him, she needed to move in. But then, when she got into a car accident, he met her mother, who treated both of them kindly. He then met the rest of her family, who extended the same courtesy to him. He then watched her interact with them and saw no signs of what she had claimed. Of course, he doesn't know what happens behind closed doors, and would likely trust the person he loves. But there are only two outcomes to that situation. Either 1, he continues to believe the lies she tells him about her family, and his relationship with them deteriorates because he sees them as people who want to harm his girlfriend. Or 2, he begins to question why it is that her relationship with her family is only so bad when she is mad at them, and why she feels so comfortable interacting with people she accused of heinous actions moments before. Again, usually when people manipulate those closest in their lives in this manner, you see a high turnover rate of friends, because every few months, their goodwill runs out, and they will need to find new people to leech off of.
You would threaten self-harm, you said?
At times, yes.
And would she tell you if she wanted you to come home or she wanted you to stay or what?
She wanted me to stay, and I felt really bad a lot of these times because it was like it always seemed to be the one.
Judge, I'd like to approach the bench.
Mr. Mengel, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You mentioned before that you know an individual, John Hansen, correct?
Yes.
How long have you known John Hansen?
Probably about 4 or 5 years.
Do you remember how you first met him?
I believe it was actually at D&D. Josh was running a campaign, and I met him and his wife at the time.
Would you consider yourselves, and we'll focus really on the summer 2017 through March of 2018, so the same kind of time frame we've been talking about already. Were you friends at that time?
Yeah, exceptionally close.
Did you ever hang out with John Hansen as well as the defendant at the same time?
Yeah, on multiple occasions.
As far as you could tell, were the defendant and John Hansen friends or were they acquaintances?
They were friends. They had interests and hobbies.
Now, was there a time period that was there a date when you saw from the outside of your apartment, John Hansen and the defendant inside of your apartment?
There were multiple times, I guess, but yeah, there was one specific one at the.
Was there I guess we'll call it an incident that you observed?
It seemed like an incident, but at the time I wasn't sure because
So let me just kind of walk through that one by one. What did you observe from the outside of the apartment?
well, he kind of was like doing a choking style maneuver, and she was trying to like break out of it.
And that was, John was doing that to the defendant?
Yes.
Had you seen John do that to people before?
Yeah, it was kind of a thing. Like it was, he has a military background as well, and it was more like I'm going to teach you how to do this in case an assailant tries to hurt you or something. I didn't think any of that, but I finished my cigarette. It wasn't of any warrant to me to rush in there.
It wasn't shocking to you?
No, it wasn't shocking.
You didn't have the impression that the defendant was in any real danger?
Duress, no.
So you finished your cigarette and then you walked in. Do you remember what John did?
He seemed kind of shocked, and then he left.
Now I want to talk about February. Do you remember, so this is February 2018, do you remember being away on military assignment during that time period?
Yeah, I believe so.
Do you remember approximately how long you were gone?
It was probably about 2 or 3 weeks.
Was the defendant still living at your apartment in the beginning of February 2018?
Yes.
And did that change?
While I was gone, yes.
And you've talked to a number of officers in preparation for, or during this investigation, is that correct?
Oh, yes, very many.
And and you've also had an opportunity to review some of the transcripts of those recorded interviews?
Yes.
And if I was able to show you a portion of a transcript, would that help refresh your memory as to what dates you were actually gone in February 2018?
I believe it would.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Counsel, it's DOJ 4320. Should I be show you?
Yes, please.
Right, you can read as much of this as you need to, but I'll have you at some point focus in on the highlighted portion, and don't tell me anything out loud, just tell me when you've had a chance to review that.
Yeah, I reviewed it.
Does that refresh your recollection as to when you were gone?
Yes, it says,
And then I'll take this away from you, and if you could just tell me, based on your refreshed recollection, what dates approximately you were gone in February 2018?
it said 4th to 14th, I believe. Or I didn't know I was going to have to read it out. Sorry. I was reading my own words. I wasn't sure I was going to have to speak them again. 05 to 13. Okay.
And what were the dates that you were gone, if you recall?
05 to 14.
So February 5th to February 14th, 2018?
Yes.
Do you remember you said that the defendant living with you at the apartment changed while you were gone. How did you become aware that that changed?
We had a conversation one night. She seemed kind of distant, but I didn't think anything was too amiss. And the next morning she had messaged me that she needed to move out.
Did that catch you off guard?
Yeah, very.
Do you remember if that was at the beginning or the end of that time you were gone?
It's kind of like in the middle of it, I believe.
Did the defendant actually move out of the apartment?
When I returned home, her stuff was gone, so yes.
So from the time period that the defendant moved out, and I'll ask you some follow-up questions, so I'm just looking for whether or not you're aware. Are you aware of so between the time period she moved out and then March 22nd, which is the date we're really here for today, are you aware where she lived? Different
She had
locations?
multiple residences. at
Okay.
the time.
Are you aware that she lived with her mother for a time?
Yes.
Did she tell you that?
Yeah, she had told me.
And did she tell you that she lived with her dad, Joe Shane, or Joe Carlin for a while as well?
Yes.
Did the defendant tell you that she was looking for an apartment in the Eau Claire area?
Yeah, I believe her and Alex and I can't remember, Sarah, I believe, were possibly going to get an apartment together.
So you said that the defendant and Alex, so you're talking about Alex Woodworth?
Alex Woodworth, yes.
And Samantha, does that sound right?
Samantha, yes, she's a teacher.
Did the defendant ever talk to you about wanting to stay in Eau Claire?
I think she wanted to stay in Eau Claire. I don't think she wanted to move back to Stanley.
Were there times during the time period that, when she moved out, up into that March 22nd date, that she stayed in a hotel?
Yes,
How do you know that?
I was there as well.
Did you get the hotel for her?
She didn't have any money, so yes.
She didn't have money, so yes, you did?
It was kind of a safe haven. She was not having a good, her home situation wasn't always optimal, so.
So is it she?
Judge, I'm going to object to that.
Okay, again, just a reminder, Mr. Mengel, just,
Yes.
you don't have to explain, just answer the questions.
So, can I go ahead, Judge?
Yes, go ahead.
So she needed a place to stay and you were helping her out.
She just needs somewhere to stay.
Was she welcome at your apartment anymore?
Alex and Jenna had kind of voiced their opinion on it.
Now, I'm going to object to anything Alex and John told him is here.
Okay, I will sustain on hearsay grounds for any content.
So you, staying at your apartment wasn't an option, is that right?
Yes, it wasn't an option.
And I think you said this, did you stay at the hotel with her on the nights that there was a hotel for her to stay at?
Yes.
During one of the times that you were at the hotel, or a hotel, did you observe some messages on the defendant's phone?
Yes.
And who were those messages, if you know, who were the messages between?
Between her and John.
John Hanson?
John Hanson, yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit 473 first, 474, 475, and 476. So first of all, if you could look at 473, do you recognize what that, just a yes or no, do you recognize what that document is?
Yes, I recall this.
Is that a snapshot of some of the messages you saw on the defendant's?
Yeah, I screenshotted them and sent them to my phone.
When you say screenshotted, do you mean you used
Yeah,
her device?
You use multiple buttons, and I think I did that, or maybe I took a photo. I can't recall for sure at this moment. But
Is that an accurate copy of the messages you remember seeing on the defendant's phone?
of just this first one or the entire?
Just the first one first.
Yes.
And then if I could have you look at Exhibit 474, please.
Okay.
And the same question, do you recognize those messages?
Yes,
Are those again messages between the defendant and John Hanson?
they are.
And are those messages that you snapshotted on her device and sent to you or took a picture with your device?
Either of the, I can't recall for sure which, but I sent them to myself.
And again, is that an accurate copy of the messages that you remember seeing?
They are.
And the next exhibit, I believe, should be 475, is that correct?
Yes.
Same question, do you recognize those as being messages that you observed on the defendant's device between the defendant and John Hanson?
Yes.
And again, you either captured them somehow
They captured them somehow.
and
Yes.
sent them to your phone or kept them on your phone?
Yes.
And those are accurate as you remember them?
Yeah, they haven't been altered or anything. They're accurate.
And then the final one, I believe, is Exhibit 476. Are those again accurate messages between the defendant and John Hanson as you saw them on her device while at the hotel in the time period we talked about?
Yes.
And are those accurate as you recall them?
Yeah, as accurate as I can recall.
Your Honor, I'd move Exhibits 473 through 476 into evidence and ask to publish to the jury by putting out the envelope.
All right, previous objection noted, preserved for the record. Court will receive Exhibits 473 through 476 and may be published to the jury.
First is Exhibit 473.
before we once again are made aware of the messages between Ezra and John, recall that this is a man that Ezra would go on to state raped her while she was too drunk to consent, then forced himself on her a second time. She would also state that John Hansen trying to teach her how to get out of a chokehold was him actively assaulting her. As you look at these messages, keep that in the forefront of your mind, and pay attention to who in this conversation continues to try and make things sexual, and who is responding with one-word, pretty neutral answers.
And Mr. Mengel, those are dated February 11th, 2018, is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's the sent date.
And from your recollection of these messages, are you able to say which, either the blue bubbles or the white bubbles, are the defendant or John Hansen?
It's stressful looking for places, so that would be Ezra McCandless.
Okay, so the blue would be the defendant,
Yes,
and the white would be John Hansen?
yes.
Okay, and if you could just read the first message from the defendant, from John Hansen at the top says, nice, correct?
Correct.
And how does the defendant respond?
It's stressful looking for places, so that would be nice to relieve.
And it actually says relive, correct?
I think she meant relieve, but yeah, relive.
And then the next message down is again from the defendant. What does that say?
Judge, I'm going to object to Mr.
I've
Mengel.
sustained, again, Mr. Mengel, just what you see, not what you
yes, sorry.
think or interpret or think she meant, but just what you observe, okay?
Roger.
Just keep going.
If I could have you read the next message, starting with working out.
Working out, again, does really make you want to fuck everything that's moved.
And then the next message again from the defendant says what?
Might also be a predator.
And then the last message there, which is from John Hansen, is cut off. Is that right?
Yeah, a body in motion wants to stay in motion.
Okay, and I'll show you Exhibit 474. Does the top message pick up where that message left off?
Yes, it does.
If you could read the first blue message from the defendant,
Are you going to pound this anytime soon?
and the message below that is what?
Sorry, I'm rude.
Again from the defendant.
Yes.
And the response from John Hansen?
Not this week. I have Warren. It's all right to be blunt. Just got to be all right with it coming back your way.
How familiar, you're good friends with John Hansen?
Yes,
Are you familiar with whether he has a child?
he does.
And what is that child's name?
Warren.
And the message below that from the defendant, the final one on this screenshot, is what?
Just let me know when I get my next in and out. Also, hanging and doing art again would be nice because you're more than a good dick.
Looking over these texts, it's evident that the sexual relationship was being spearheaded by Ezra. There's no indication that she feels upset or violated over their sexual past, or that she is scared of John in any way. If anything, it's relevant how almost uncaring she is about the tremendous violation of trust that they took part in. These are two people who were close and perceptively cared for Jason. They saw him often, talked to him nearly every day, and yet they are able to talk about having sex behind his back without even an ounce of trepidation or care.
Move on to Exhibit 475. If you could read, starting with the top message in the blue from the defendant,
That should be nice. He's such a cool kid.
and the response from John Hansen,
Why, thank you. He's a good kid. I'm looking forward to spending some dad time with him.
and the next message from the defendant,
That melts my heart. I'd love to paint with him sometime.
and then it looks like there's a date that says February 12th, 2018 at 7:40 p.m., correct?
Correct.
And the next message from the defendant says what?
Feeling like a snake today. What's wriggling in your mind?
And there's another bubble with a date and time, February 12th, 2018 at 8:11 p.m., correct?
Correct.
And what is the response from from John Hansen?
I've been with Warren all day. My mind is pretty preoccupied.
I'll show you Exhibit 476. Starting at the top, that's the message you just read, correct?
Correct.
And then there's another bubble that says February 12th, 2018 at 8:58 p.m., correct?
Correct. Yep.
And what is the message underneath that from the defendant.
That's understandable, dad time.
And then there's a bubble that says February 14th, 2018 at 6:45 p.m. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the message below that from the defendant says what?
See something, say nothing, and drink to forget. Happy Valentine's.
And there's another bubble, February 14th, 2018 at 8:27 p.m., correct?
Yes.
And there's a message from John Hanson below that. What does that say?
That's beautiful as Happy Valentine's. Or Ezra.
Ezra. And there's another bubble that says February 15th, 2018 at 12:14 p.m., correct?
Yes.
And the last message from the defendant to John Hanson says what?
I have a way with words, John.
It's AHAH, correct?
Yeah.
Done with that for now, thank you. Was there a conversation that followed your discovery of those messages?
Yeah, we had a conversation
And that was a conversation between you and the defendant?
between me and the defendant and between me and John via telephone.
Now, let's start with your conversation between you and the defendant. What did the defendant tell you about those messages?
She insisted that it was of a malicious manner, like that it wasn't what I thought.
If you've ever been in this kind of situation, you know how earth-shattering and confusing the direct aftermath can be. Finding out the person you love and trust more than anyone else in your life has essentially been lying to you since they have slept with another person is shocking. Now add to the fact that they have slept with someone that you're close to. You've seen both parties since they have slept together. You kiss and held the person who cheated on you, and you talked for hours with the person they cheated on you with. In the entire time, neither seemed the least bit sorry or at all affected by their own antics. In fact, she's texting John that she wants to sleep with him another time, and he's reciprocating. You would begin to replay every moment that you spent with both parties, wondering if they got off on hanging out with you without you knowing. And suddenly, the two people you thought the world of have become dangerous people to be around, and emotionally, you are no longer safe. The immediate processing of this kind of betrayal is intense, and often takes a considerable amount of time for the aggrieved party to come to any kind of clarity on their situation. As we heard, Jason said at the beginning of his testimony that he had to physically write down a timeline in order to understand what had happened here. So the night he found the messages, he was not in a state to actually listen to and process what was happening. Regardless of that fact, he confronted Ezra, who immediately attempted to make the messages and her gleeful infidelity be indicative of John abusing her. When narcissists, like Ezra, are confronted, this tends to be the initial course of action because it's where they feel the safest. Ezra did something wrong. She screwed up. And her texts with John are cut and dry. But if she says that, the relationship with Jason is then over. So she tries to shift the narrative. Now, instead of her cheating and repeatedly asking John to have sex with her again, she was being victimized by him. From the text messages alone, that story seems unbelievable. But mere moments before, the very concept that Ezra would cheat on him at all, and his friend would betray him in that way, also seemed impossible. So he would truly not know what to do.
Did she tell you, and I don't want you to assume, I just want you to tell me what she told you if she did she tell you anything that explains what you mean when you say it was in a malicious manner?
Not until we had actually left the hotel, because we went on a drive. But that's when she inferred to it being it's like an assault.
Said that John Hanson assaulted her?
Yes.
Did she say whether that was before or after those messages that you saw?
Did you say that before or after?
I should rephrase that. So the messages aren't from the date that you saw them, are they?
No, I think I screenshotted them for my own levity.
And
I didn't get that. Can you repeat
I screenshotted them for my own levity to save, because I was thinking I was losing my mind in all these conversations with people.
So the messages say February 11th through 14th as the dates. You didn't see them until a couple weeks later, is that right?
Yes, until later on.
So did the defendant tell you that as she described it, the assault by John Hanson occurred before or after the dates on the messages?
I cannot recall. I know that the assault happened while I was gone.
And at some point, you actually created
I created a timeline.
a bit of a timeline, correct?
Yeah.
And that was based on information that you knew at the time you created the timeline?
I was trying to make sense of it all.
Did that have a date that you're aware of that you believe the assaults to have happened on?
Yeah, I don't think I put it in. I put it on the paperwork, yes.
And if I showed you that timeline that you created, would that help refresh your recollection as to when you believe the assaults to have occurred?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Counsel, it's actually marked as exhibit 455.
Yeah, I'm not finding it right this second. Here you go.
Mr. Mengel, does this look like the timeline that you created?
Yes, this is the one I gave to the police officers.
And I'm going to ask you just to review it, and then I'll ask you some follow-up questions once you've had a chance to take a look and see if it refreshes your memory.
Yeah, it's the second hash mark on here.
Okay, so you've had a chance to review that document. Does that refresh your recollection as to when
Yes.
you believe the assaults occurred?
4 or 5.
As February 4th or 5th?
Yeah, it's the hash mark, second hash mark on there.
And again, we're talking about the 2018 time period, right?
Yes.
So that would have been before the dates on the messages we looked at on the screen, correct?
Yeah, the 4 and 5 is because the assault was, there were 2 assaults apparent. One at night and one in the morning prior, like afterwards. So I was under the impression it was she had been at his house and then the next day was also.
And we'll walk through that in a second here. You said that the conversation initially was between you and the defendant, and then there was a phone call to John Hanson. Did you confront him about what the defendant was telling you
Yes,
and about what the messages showed?
yes.
And did John Hanson tell you that initially there wasn't a sexual assault, there wasn't a sexual encounter?
There was nothing at all, he said at first. And once I produced things, the stories changed and I just didn't know who to trust.
Okay. And
Again, this instance of infidelity was so impactful on Jason that he couldn't process it properly. That fact was only made worse by the fact that both Ezra and Alex were lying to him about it. Ezra had been in the room with Jason when he found the messages, and so she knew better than to lie and say nothing happened. Instead, she immediately confessed that they did have sex, but stated it was non-consensual. John had no idea that the messages had been found, and so when he was confronted by Jason, he lied and denied the affair outright, which only would confuse Jason more.
we'll just walk through this step by step here. So you said that there were really 2 incidents, and based on your timeline, we're looking at February 4th and February 5th. What specifically did the defendant tell you happened during the February 4th incident?
The nighttime one?
Yes.
They had all been drinking together. They were kind of giving her a hard time for not keeping up, so she was trying to like drink with the boys, I guess. And
And let me just stop you there. Who is they? They were drinking together.
John and Ryan,
Is that John's roommate at the time?
John's roommate, yes.
So John, Ryan, and the defendant were drinking, right?
Yes.
What did the defendant tell you happened next?
She stated that she was being taken upstairs. Well, she had puked in the toilet quite a bit. Ryan went to bed. And she was taken upstairs and laid in bed. And she just assumed, she assumed that she was being taken care of, like she could just use the bed then.
Did the defendant tell you what she said John did next?
She said that she felt her tights being pulled down at some point.
Did the defendant say that John had sex with her?
She says when she woke up, she said that something felt off. She says in the moment of it, she was blacked out drunk pretty much. So
That's
she
what she
remembers
said?
vaguely.
And I didn't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was information that she told you.
Yeah, that there was that a woman will know some things if something has happened in the morning.
Did the defendant tell you if John told her to go into another room?
I think I believe he asked her to. go into a different room, yes. I can't recall though for sure.
Okay. Now, it sounds like a nighttime incident, and then did the defendant tell you that if she stayed over at John's house that night?
She stayed over and he dropped her off in the morning, I believe.
So on February 5th, 2018, you referenced the second assault. What specifically did the defendant tell you happened on February 5th?
She said that he dropped her off. She said that he played kind of coy to it, that nothing had happened. So he dropped her off. To use the bathroom.
Was that dropped her off at the apartment that
At our apartment, yes.
Okay. You said John came in to use the bathroom?
That's what I believe she had stated,
And what did the defendant tell you happened next?
that there was a second assault at the apartment.
Did the defendant tell you where that happened in the apartment?
On my bed. Our bed.
Were you still in a dating relationship with the defendant at the time of that assault on February 4th,
Yes,
as well as February 5th?
yes.
Did you have any artwork in your room at the apartment?
There's lots of pieces of art in the apartment, yeah.
Was there a specific piece hanging over the bed?
Yes, there was.
Do you remember if that painting over the bed was there when the defendant and John Hansen were in there on February 5th, 2018?
I believe it would have been. I was still there when I returned.
Okay, so it was there when you left and it was there when you returned? Do you know what eventually happened to that painting?
I know I gave it back because I felt weird. It had sentimental value and I didn't want it looming over my head. But I think I believe she traded it with Maxwell.
Is that Max Martinson?
Yes. They did like an art swap.
Did you eventually learn of another sexual relationship the defendant was involved in while you were in a dating relationship with her?
Yes,
Who did that involve?
with Alexander Woodworth.
Do you remember approximately when you learned about that relationship?
I don't know, I kind of knew something was up at points, but I didn't really finitely know until the night that I had the conversation with him and John Hansen at Racy's.
So did you confront both of them at the same time?
Yes, I had a conversation with them.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use the word confront. I should let you speak.
How this question was asked and how Jason is answering is confusing, so I'll provide some much-needed context. When Jason is talking about confronting Alex and John together, he's talking about when he first found out that Ezra had been unfaithful with Alex. He didn't know that at the same time, Ezra had also cheated with John. Alex and Ezra's relationship was more in-depth, with Alex telling her that he loved her and them, at some point deciding that they wanted to move out to Portland together. When Jason confronted them together, he was asking if John knew about the affair, and why it was that everyone else seemed to know what was going on in his life more than he did. It was only later that he found out about John as well. Ezra and Alex had done very little to hide their affair, with Ezra often showing up at Alex's work to hang out with him and go on walks together. Everyone in their lives saw how Alex treated Ezra. He viewed her as a morally good, beautiful person, who he thought he was unworthy of. During the trial, when his journal was read out, he described her as being the one beacon of good in his life, and discussed how the only issue she had was the fact that she was in love with a monster. That monster, of course, being Jason. Ezra had told Alex, along with multiple of their mutual friends, that Jason had become emotionally volatile after the abortion, and was incredibly cruel to her. She spun tales of him mistreating her, and Alex's own journals are filled with his writing about wanting to save her and protect her from all the people who would see her harmed. Even Jason noticed that whenever Ezra and Alex hung out, there seemed to be romantic feelings on his side for Ezra, but when he brought it up to her, she adamantly denied it. When we discussed how confusing this situation is for Jason, this is what we are talking about. He lives with and sees his girlfriend every day. He is constantly around her, and for the few months they were together, everything she said was a lie, but he believed her. He sees a shift occur in one of her friendships, and talks to her about it, only for her to tell him that he's wrong. He's seeing things and he's crazy. Alex is a good guy and his friend. Does he really think he would do that to him? He then begins to feel bad for believing his own perception and starts to doubt what he knows to be true. Sure, he saw Ezra and Alex together, and they seemed uncomfortably close, but they are just friends. He's just being paranoid and controlling, and penalizing Ezra because of that. Now she is the victim, despite the fact that she is actively cheating on him with 2 other men. By the time everything came out, Jason's mind had been taught to not trust itself, and only trust what Ezra had said and done.
How did you confirm that there was a sexual relationship between the defendant and Alex Woodworth?
I just like the list I made, I kept compiling things and it just fit. So I kind of figured it out myself. Plus other parties had elaborated to it on me.
Did you ask the defendant about the relationship?
Not immediately.
Did you ask or tell Alex that you knew?
I went out for a smoke with Alex and we had a semi-stern conversation about how, I really loved and respected him and I couldn't understand why this was happening. And then I did not know about the other stuff yet, but I mean.
Did the defendant eventually tell you about the sexual relationship she had with Alex Woodworth?
Yes.
Did she tell you, initially, what did she tell you about the first time that she was engaged in a sexual encounter with Alex Woodworth?
The first time, like the date, or the first time the encounter?
The first encounter, what did she tell you initially that was?
I believe while I was in the Redwoods, there was a date when they went on a walk together and some things transpired.
When you say things transpired, I don't want you to speculate, but did the defendant tell you more about what that means?
Well, she had spent the night, I believe, at his apartment.
Did the defendant tell you if she went to Alex Woodworth after the incident with John?
Yes, she went to him for like counsel or for help because she trusted him.
Did the defendant tell you what happened then?
That there was another situation. She put it as if he had taken like advantage of her weakened state almost. Again, I don't want you to make an inference or assume, but did the defendant say whether or not there was a sexual encounter between her and Alex Woodworth that time? I believe there was something coerced or some relations that were had.
Is that how she described it?
I'm going to object and ask that you move to strike. I believe something was coerced. His belief is not relevant.
I can follow up with a clarifying question, Judge.
All right, well, the objection's noted. Again, counsel, when you make your objection, please use the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's shut off. I mean, I can hear you, but
No, I apologize,
I don't
Judge.
know
I forgot.
public can hear you. So,
Okay, sure.
all right, well, again, Mr. Mengel, again, just stick to, again, what's asked and what was said to you. I think in this line of questioning, you pretty much have to stick with what Ms. McCandless said to you rather than how you interpreted it, okay?
Roger.
Okay.
Yes.
Did the defendant tell you that Alex took advantage of her?
That's how she stated it.
So if you're following along at home, here is Ezra's story. She hung out with Jason's friend while he was away, and that friend got her drunk, then raped her. The next morning, he drove her back to the apartment she shared with Jason, and they had sex again, although she would go on to state that this time it was not necessarily rape, because she felt worthless, and just had sex with him in Jason's bed because she didn't know what else to do. She then approached Alex, another mutual friend of theirs, and instead of providing any comfort, he took advantage of her in a weakened state, and then they began sleeping together at the time. Also, while this is happening, she is texting with John that she cannot wait for them to have sex again, sending him text messages for Valentine's Day, and talking about wanting to hang out with him more because, and I quote, he's more than just a good dick. You hear that, everybody? He's got feelings too. She is also thinking about moving into a new apartment with Alex, the man she is claiming took advantage of her, and hanging out with him so often that Jason suspected infidelity. This all makes such little sense that no one could ever really believe that, but that's not necessarily the point. When Ezra was telling this story to Jason initially, she didn't have time to sit down, go over all the information that Jason had, and determine a course of action. She was in the moment in front of him, and trying desperately to gain some control over the situation. Up until that point, Jason had been swallowing her lies without question. All she needed to do was to get him to believe her in the moment, then slowly make the story more and more believable for later retellings.
Now, you eventually, at some point, you found out that the defendant and Alex Woodworth were involved in a relationship longer than just the February time period, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Um,
I wrote the dates down once again.
That
I wrote the dates down once again on my.
And was there do you know what The Little Prince is?
It's a book. I think it's a French book.
And does that Little Prince mean anything to you in terms of figuring out a time period that you believe the relationship between the defendant and Alex Woodworth existed?
I believe that was the first night she spent at his house. They watched the movie and Donnie Darko.
And do you remember, as you sit there today, what the date that was?
Negative. I just looked at it, but I can't recall.
And if I showed you that same timeline that you mentioned, would that help refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Is this the same timeline that you previously looked at to refresh your recollection?
Yes.
And by looking at that again, would that help refresh your recollection as to the Little Prince
Yeah.
incident? And I'm going to take that away from you. If that refreshes your recollection, what was the date of the Little Prince movie viewing with the defendant and Alex Woodworth?
November 7th.
And that's 2017, correct?
Yes.
And you just did the defendant tell you eventually what had happened that night between the defendant and Alex Woodworth?
That the intercourse had happened.
So, that blows her initial story about Alex taking advantage of her way out of the water. Which, I mean, we already knew it was fake, but still. If you put yourself in Jason's shoes, every time he looked into something Ezra said, he found out it was a lie.
All right, if I may approach again.
You may.
I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit 685. Do you recognize what that is?
That's me.
And what is it a picture of a message?
Yeah, this is me in California.
And that message, does it reference the Little Prince?
Yes, it says, was a great night.
I want to ask.
Yeah, it references.
It references the Little Prince. And is that a conversation between you and the defendant?
Yes.
Does it have a date on it?
November 7th at 1:23 p.m.
Okay. Your Honor, so is that an accurate copy of a conversation you and the defendant had on November 7th, 2017?
Yes.
I move that exhibit into evidence and ask for permission to publish.
Any objection?
Nope.
All right, Exhibit 6, is it 685?
It is.
And by the way, you were correct, the last one. I had it wrong. Exhibit 685 is received, you may publish.
So Exhibit 685. And Mr. Mengel, if you could read, so the top bubble, is that a message from the defendant to you?
Yes.
And what does that say?
She's also suicidal, so I've been really working hard to stay with her, but hanging with Sailor and her BF was great. I got to watch The Little Prince with Alex, so that's refreshing. Work tomorrow.
Thank you. Do you recall where you were at the time that that conversation occurred?
I believe I was in San Francisco, but I might have been already in Arcata.
Somewhere out west?
In California at that time, yeah.
Did the defendant give you an explanation of how the relationship between her and Alex Woodworth progressed?
Like an explanation on how it happened?
Yeah, did she say that, did she say if she was, yes, how did it happen?
They were both going through some things in life, and she had, She had been through something traumatic. He had been through traumatic things. So they kind of bonded over, like, misery loves company kind of thing.
Did the defendant ever, and right now I'll follow up with some questions, but I just want a yes or no. First of all, did the defendant ever tell you about the sexual encounters between the two?
Negative. At that time,
At any point?
not until I confronted.
So that was after you learned?
After I learned, yeah.
And what did the defendant tell you about the sexual encounters she had with Alex Woodworth?
Are we talking after I
Yes.
found out or before?
After you found out, I'm sorry.
Okay. She said that, we didn't talk much until after all this stuff had transpired. So it was different, I guess. I'm not sure what a tender term to use.
Did the information that she provided to you, was that after she moved out of your apartment?
The information provided, yes, after she was gone.
And did the defendant tell you that things went too fast with Alex?
Yeah, they went pretty fast, she said.
Did she tell you that Alex would do certain things to her during sexual acts?
She mentioned things, yes.
What did the defendant say?
I'm not entirely sure on the verbiage, but it was like choking or boarding or something, I believe it was. I can't really recall.
What?
Boarding? I'm not sure if I recall what it was called, but
Now, that information that she told you, that was after she had moved out of your apartment?
this was way up. This is very far after, yes.
And was it also after you found out about her relationship with John Hanson?
Yes.
And it was obviously after you had found out about her relationship with Alex Woodworth, correct?
Yes.
Now, up until that point that you found out about those relationships, had she ever mentioned anything to you about that?
Up until she mentioned,
Had she, actually, that was a terrible question. I'll rephrase that.
Right.
Up until you found out about the defendant's relationship with both Alex as well as John Hanson, had she told you about the different sexual things Alex Woodworth did with her?
she didn't really elaborate. I knew that something had happened, but she didn't elaborate.
At some point, did you clean up a bandage or clean up Alex Woodworth's arm and put a bandage on?
I did.
How did that, was that because the defendant contacted you and said he needed to help Alex?
Yeah.
And where did you go to help Alex?
His and Matt's house.
What did you observe on Alex that needed to be bandaged?
He hadn't dug very deep, but he had slit his wrist.
Did you clean out the wound?
Yeah, I cleaned it out, and I think I used some type of Dermabond to seal it.
Do you remember approximately, and I know this is a long time ago, do you remember a month, a general time frame when that happened?
I can't be sure.
Do you remember telling officers that you thought it was around the time of like seasonal depression?
It was in the holiday season because I can't recall the exact date, but the knife that he said he had slipped using, he was drinking that night, he said, and he slipped and cut himself, was a gift from a coworker at work.
Did you see the knife that he said he used?
I didn't see the knife that he said he used.
Did the defendant tell you what Alex told her about why he cut his wrist?
He had told her if she didn't leave him, he was going to kill himself.
And when you say him, is that you?
Me, yes.
Again, we need to emphasize how it didn't matter how good or kind a person you were. If Ezra believed you crossed her, or if she simply needed a scapegoat for any situation, she would throw you under the bus. Alex was a deeply emotional person. He felt incredibly deeply and kept most of his feelings in his writing, where he described feeling different than other people, being a monster, and having nothing good in his life. While he enjoyed things and loved the people around him, he would state that he felt unworthy of their love and care, and that their being so good to him only emphasized how bad he was. This was a person who, before Ezra came into his life, was already struggling. There is no evidence anywhere that Alex ever leveraged his mental health against Ezra. In fact, in his journals, he said the opposite. While he wanted to be with Ezra, and it hurt him that she was always going back to Jason or sleeping with other people, he felt like she wasn't wrong for doing it because his own self-image was so bad. He said he would always love and support her, even if she wasn't with him. But when Alex asked for help, after he purposely or accidentally slit his wrists, Ezra used that situation to try and mend her relationship with Jason. She saw an opportunity to use Alex's depression and potential suicide attempt for her own advantage, which is so detestable you almost can't believe it.
Did the defendant, when she described her sexual relationship with Alex Woodworth, did she describe it as consensual?
She said it was somewhat, I don't know how to speculate on consent.
And I won't ask you to speculate. Let me ask a different question. Did she ever tell you that did the defendant ever tell you that Alex took advantage of her?
There were times she said that he was aggressive and would kind of throw a tantrum almost.
Did she ever tell you that he raped her?
She never made it sound like rape with Alex.
But she did with John?
Yes.
And I'm going to object to leading. Ask that be stricken.
Sustained on leading.
Did the defendant ever tell you how Alex described his feelings for the defendant?
He loved her very much.
That's what she said?
Yeah, I think at one point they planned to maybe move out to Portland or something.
Do you remember what time period generally that was?
I mean, it would have been initially after I found out about all the stuff. Because I confronted him and we had a slight conversation. I mean, I didn't like him, but I still loved him. I was angry.
And you're talking about Alex?
Woodworth, yes.
So you mentioned that you talked to both John as well as Alex once you found out about the relationships, right?
Yes, I talked to John.
Where did that conversation happen?
Me and John's?
When you were in person, not on the phone. We talked about the phone.
Oh, yeah, at Racy's.
At Racy's? Was Alex there as well?
Yes. The conversation between John Hanson and me and Alex was before the John days, though. I didn't know about John's situation. And I believe I did not know about John's situation until after the fact.
Okay.
Because I talked to John Hanson outside about, did you know this? Like, how come nobody told me? Like, why is everyone just lying to me?
About Alex?
Yes. You know, I don't think I had any information on Hanson's transgression yet.
And then, do you remember, was there an event that was going on the day that the not confrontation, but the discussion with Alex occurred at Racy's?
Yeah, there was an art exhibit, like at Shift, the bike coffee shop.
Okay. Now, at some point, you talked with law enforcement about the John Hanson relationship with the defendant, correct?
Yes.
And Do you remember going over to Josh Trankler's house?
Yeah, I was pretty irate.
Was that before or after you found out about John?
After I found out about John.
Yeah, did you go to Josh's house? Was that
I
after?
already knew about it when I went to Josh's.
And when you said you were pretty irate, was that because you learned about John?
I learned about what had happened, and I just wanted Josh to help me find like a center and like, what do we do? Like, what do we do for her?
Was Josh a good friend of yours?
He's very good.
Did he call the police?
Yeah, he called the police, and someone came over to take statements.
And did the defendant go to the police department, if you know?
At some later date, yes, I was with her.
Do you remember if she went that night? If you recall.
She might have went in for a kit, but it was a couple days that, like, it had been so many days that I think they said it wouldn't have been plausible to find.
So that's just based on your recollection?
That's based on my recollection.
Okay. Did you ever tell the defendant that she had to go tell the police?
I didn't want to force her, but the way I prefaced it was, you can't, if this assault happened, just because there's a chance that they won't find evidence on you, it'll put someone on the radar for future. And it's not about an assault that happened to you, it's for the next girl. So I kind of tried to, I wouldn't say I tried to coach her, but I just tried to like show her the humanity in it and be like, if this happened, you need to report this.
Did you tell her what to say?
No, I didn't coach her at all.
Did you ever tell her to lie?
No.
So after you found out about Alex and the defendant and John and the defendant, I assume you said Racy's is a pretty tight-knit group?
Yeah.
Did people at Racy's find out?
Yeah, everyone knew.
Did they talk about it?
It was kind of hush. Like, I mean, it was like Snickers and stuff like that, you know. People would, sidebar comments and whatnot.
Did the defendant ever talk to you about whether or not she cared that people knew?
About the relationships?
Or about, let me rephrase that. Did she ever talk to you about people talking about her at Racy's?
She didn't like it.
So she knew it was happening?
Yeah, she knew it was happening.
At some point, were you alerted that there was a message in the bathroom at Racy's?
Yes.
What was that message?
It was like black ink and then her number.
Did you see it yourself?
I saw it myself at one point and took a photo. I wrote over it.
What did you write over it?
A conversation that we had a conversation, and her father, Joe, had told her like life starts now, and like she was in the process of getting another job. She was going in on, I think it was a Friday, for a TB test to be read. She was going to pick up scrubs.
So things were changing.
Things were going good, and like it was just like, you don't have to live in the past just because these bad things happen.
And
life starts now.
You took a picture of the message?
Yeah,
Did you send it to the defendant?
I sent it to her.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Mr. Mengel, is that the photograph of the message on the board?
Yeah,
Is that an accurate picture,
I mean it's a picture of it.
as you recall it?
As I recall it, yes.
I move Exhibit 479 into evidence.
Any objection?
No.
All right, Exhibit 479 will be received.
And without putting it on the screen, it said the words, "fuck me," and then the number you knew to be associated with the defendant, correct?
With her calling app.
Okay, so that was a number
Text
that
now.
maybe it wasn't her phone, but it was an app that she had?
She had an app on her iPhone, yes.
In our initial coverage, and most of the coverage of this case, it's speculated that Ezra put her number on the bathroom wall herself in order to further victimize herself with Jason, Alex, and whoever else she could be manipulating. Though it was put in the men's bathroom, Ezra was well known at Racy's for using both restrooms. She would even state that she would use the bathroom of whatever gender she identified with at the moment, so the idea that she would put her number on the wall was not strange. What would be strange would be if one of the very kind people she had been fucking over had put her number there. Jason, as we have seen, does not appear to be the kind of person to do that. He seemed to genuinely want to help her, even after everything she had done to him, and Alex was in love with her, hopelessly so. I've cut out nearly 30 minutes of material here, as they go over Jason's day prior to Alex's killing, which we have no commentary for. If you would like to see the full testimony, a link will be left in the description box down below to Rottweiler Investigation's original upload. While we specifically had nothing of value to add to that content, it would be no doubt interesting viewing for those invested in this case.
Did you eventually, on March 22nd, 2018, go looking for the defendant?
The day of
The day that you saw her at Racy's?
yes.
Why did you go looking for the defendant?
Something did not seem right.
Where did you go initially, if you recall?
Initially, I started just biking around trying to think like, well, maybe she went to John's house, but I realized it was pretty far out and the roads were pretty nasty, so I thought I'll go to Alex's first and then go out of town afterwards.
And when you went to Alex's, what did you see from the outside?
I saw her car idling in his driveway.
Was there anybody in the car?
Negative.
But obviously the keys were inside if it was idling.
Yeah, it was idling.
What did you do?
Well, I sat across at there's like a school across the way. I sat there, parked my bike, because I just was like, well, everything's probably fine. Everything's probably fine. You know, I wasn't sure for both parties involved that they should be alone.
Did you eventually go in the car and take the keys out?
I went in the car and turned the car off, yes. At that time, I noticed that note that was on the passenger seat.
I'm sorry, he dropped his voice and I couldn't hear him.
At that time, I noticed the note that he had showed me earlier on the passenger seat.
Was that the note from Jenna?
Yes.
Do you know how that note got there?
I had given it to Ezra, I believe.
Was there anybody else in or around the car aside from you in that area?
No, I looked around. I didn't see anybody. That was about it. You know, I just felt something was not right because it.
And did you knock on the door to the house?
Not initially. I waited for quite a while. I was like, maybe everything's fine. They'll just come out. But after about 40 minutes or so, I just had an uneasy feeling. So I approached the door and my cell phone went off and I had a very noticeable ringtone. I heard her call down, "Just let him help you." Her recognizing my phone. So I was like, oh God, he's hurting himself again. So I just ran up the stairs.
And when you heard someone say, "Just let him help you," were you referring to the defendant?
Yeah,
That's the person who said that?
Ezra, it was Ezra's voice, yes.
So you went into the house?
Yes, I was in the house.
You went upstairs?
Yes.
Did you go into a room?
Yeah, on the right-hand side, it was his bedroom.
That was Alex's room?
I believe so.
Do you remember if the door was open or closed when you went upstairs?
Slightly ajar.
Who was inside?
Ezra and Alexander.
And for these purposes, when we say Alex or Alexander, we're talking about Woodworth, right?
Woodworth, Roger. Yes.
Where was Alex located in the room, if you recall?
I believe he was closer to the window and she was closer to the door.
Were they standing or sitting, if you remember?
Sitting on the bed.
Did you ask if everyone was all right?
Yeah, I was very, like, you guys scared the shit out of me. You know, I was like, I was worried, you know.
Did the defendant say she was all right?
They both, you know, there had been, when I was outside and I had heard the "just let him help you," there was bickering going on. So I was under the impression that she wasn't being allowed to leave. So I was scared for him. I was scared for her. But they seemed like oddly calm.
When you got up there,
It was likely they were oddly calm because, other than Ezra loudly saying, "Just let him help you," nothing predating that statement would be alarming, as Ezra herself would go on to say her conversation with Alex at the home was difficult but not dangerous. He wasn't about to hurt himself. He wasn't keeping her there against her will. They were just talking, and he was trying to come to terms with what she had said about him. At that point, he had been made aware that she felt taken advantage of in their relationship, and he was struggling with that fact. The person he cherished, above all others, had accused him of hurting her, and he felt horrible because of that. But there was nothing in their conversation that would allude to him hurting her or himself. Like Jason said, his text message tone announced him before he entered the home. Ezra heard that, knew he was in the area, and without a step, victimized herself. She knew that Jason would come running if she thought she was in danger, and she knew that he viewed her even going to see the two men she accused of abuse as being a bad idea, and she leveraged that to her advantage.
Did the defendant say, "He won't let me leave"?
No, she didn't say anything like that.
Did she say she wanted to leave?
No,
Did she say, "Help me, Jason"?
negative.
Did she say, "He's trying to hurt me"?
No.
Did you suggest that they go somewhere else to talk?
Yeah, I told them I would wait outside and then that they should probably go to a venue of some sort to have such delicate conversations.
Did the police arrive?
Yes, the police arrived.
Did you speak with them?
I spoke with a couple cops at the time.
When the police arrived, were you exiting the house?
I think I was just walking out because I told them if anything awry was going to happen, they could make a noise. Like, he had plenty of books, throw a book against the wall, whatever, and I'll come back in.
You said that to the defendant and Alex?
To both of them, both parties. But they wanted to continue the conversation.
Did the defendant and Alex eventually come outside as well?
After I spoke with law enforcement, about the time law enforcement went to enter the house, they were both exiting.
Where did the defendant go when she exited the house?
When she exited the house, I think she came over to the driver's side of her car, I believe.
And where did Alex eventually go when he came out of the house?
The passenger side.
Did law enforcement talk with them as well?
They talked with them.
Did law enforcement eventually leave?
Yes.
And did the defendant and Alex eventually leave?
Yeah, we had a conversation and they both left.
What was your impression from that conversation as to where they were going?
Well, we had all talked a little bit and said, it probably makes sense to go someplace public. I mean, so they'd agreed to go to a coffee shop. It sounded like they didn't want to air their dirty laundry at like Racy's, so they were going to go someplace else. So I understood that. I was like, yeah, that's probably a tender place to go.
Did you see them leave?
I saw them drive away.
In the defendant's car?
What?
Were they leaving in the defendant's car?
Yes.
And who was driving, if you remember?
Ezra was driving at that time.
Alex was in the front passenger seat?
Yes.
Did you eventually return to Racy's?
Yeah, I went back to Racy's.
Did you eventually send some messages via Instagram to the defendant?
Yeah, I still had an uneasy feeling, so I was bumming around quite a bit.
Did the defendant respond to any of those messages?
Without Wi-Fi, she wasn't able to respond, I'm assuming, because her phone needed Wi-Fi to send messages back.
So you didn't receive any messages in response?
It didn't show, like, seen or anything.
Did you eventually get on your bike and go looking for Alex and the defendant?
Yeah, I started to freak out when me and Joe had talked about her. She was supposed to get the...
No, I object.
That's okay. I'll just ask you questions about what you saw and what you know not from other people. So did you then eventually end up at the Eau Claire Police Department?
Yes.
And talk to some officers?
Yes.
Now, between the time that the defendant moved out of your apartment in February of 2018 and up to March 22nd, 2018, the date of Alex Woodworth's death, did you continue to have regular contact with the defendant?
Yes. Yeah.
How frequently would you communicate with the defendant?
Pretty often, like I would say daily. We were still friends. I still worried about her.
Did you continue, before you talked about I love yous and you are valued and things like that, did you continue to say those things to each other?
Of course, yeah. She was still very important. People are important to me.
Again, put yourself in Jason's position. He just found out that the two people he believed to be his friends had either consensually carried out an affair with his girlfriend or assaulted her to some degree. His ex-girlfriend had accused one of them of rape and alluded to the other relationship as being coercive and ultimately abusive as well. He was emotionally tormented by Ezra for months and had his world completely disrupted by her. And even still, he states that each of them were important to him and deeply cared for them regardless. For any one person to have that amount of compassion and understanding towards the people who hurt them is incredible, and unfortunately, Ezra preyed upon that. When covering Jason's police interview initially, people stated that Jason should have known better, that he reacted stupidly in the situation, and so on. But to be clear, Jason wanting to believe that the one closest to him wouldn't hurt him and trusting the people around him was not wrong. Ezra, Alex, and John were the ones who were in the wrong, and criticism should land squarely in their laps.
Even while broken up, did you continue to engage in a sexual relationship during that same time period with the defendant?
There were moments of weakness, yes.
Were there messages, if you recall, where the defendant expressed her feelings for you?
Yes.
Did she tell you that she loved you?
Yes.
Did she tell you that she missed you?
Yes.
Did she tell you how much it hurt to be without you?
Yes.
Did she tell you how much she wanted to be with you?
Yes.
Did she ever talk about a future together with you?
Yeah.
Nothing further, thank you.
The following day, Jason retook the stand for cross-examination. I urge you to pay attention to the questions Ezra's lawyer is asking, and how she will try to frame all of Ezra's relationships.
I believe that when you were testifying yesterday, the prosecutor asked you what your current age was, right?
Yes.
And you're now 35, 36?
April 6, 1984. I don't keep track of things.
Okay. But at the time that you met Ezra McCandless, that was in the summer of 2017, right?
Yes, I believe so.
And you were 33 years old at the time.
I don't think that math lines up.
Well, let's try and do the math, just in case I'm making a mistake, because I don't want to. All right. You were born when again?
April 6 of 1984.
Of 1984.
Yes.
So you turned 30 in 2014, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's run it ahead 3 more years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
You were 33 when you met Ezra McCandless, right?
That makes sense, yeah.
And she was 19.
Yes.
And although the day you met her, you didn't know her age, it didn't take very long until you found out.
Yeah, a friend had C-capped her and told me.
When you think about Jason's testimony, which we just reviewed, one of the less notable things about their relationship was, surprisingly, their age. Though the prosecution brought it up, Jason stated that he hadn't realized the age gap was so large when they began dating, as Ezra hadn't told him how old she was. At most, you should claim that the prosecution brought that up in order to establish Ezra's pattern of lying, in order to get the things she wants, and by not telling Jason her age at the beginning of their relationship, she was lying by omission. The defense is trying to negate that implication, and instead paint a picture where Ezra was fairly forthcoming to Jason about her age, and if he didn't know it, it was his own fault. But two things can be true at once. Jason was likely not looking for evidence of his new girlfriend's age because it didn't seem relevant to him, and she could have actively hidden evidence that she was only 19. If she believed that he wouldn't be romantically interested due to her youth, she could have hidden that from him. The defense is trying to call every example of Ezra being manipulative into question, systematically dismantling the prosecution's arguments.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, when you say C-cap, that's because she had changed her name, right?
I believe
She had changed her name.
she had changed it from Monica Carlson, yes.
Right. And I'm going to talk to you about that name change a little bit later. But when you met her and the two of you started this friendship, which blossomed into love, she was telling you about her life, right?
Yes.
And she had just come home from her first year of college.
I believe it was her first year in Marinette.
Marinette, yeah, and she was studying art. You know, she was an artist.
Screen printing, yes.
She was living with her mom,
Yes.
and that was in Stanley, Wisconsin,
Yes.
which, although it's not in Eau Claire, it's certainly driving distance, meaning a person can drive back and forth between Eau Claire and Stanley easily in the same day, right?
Right.
What, 45 minutes, hour?
I never clocked it, but I would give it about that amount of time, yes.
Right, and you don't drive. I mean,
No.
you have a car that you use as a storage locker, but generally speaking, you don't drive, you're a bicycle guy.
I cycle, yeah.
Okay, so when you and Ezra would go places in a car, that would be her car because your car wasn't running.
Yeah, I didn't really run it for anything.
Okay, so she had the car,
Yeah,
you had the apartment.
yeah.
The defense is now trying to cancel out the depiction of Ezra as being lazy or greedy. As shown, the prosecution showcased how Ezra would use the kindness of others to get her way, moving into people's homes without having to pay rent, utilizing their resources, and then moving on when they asked her to get a job or return the favor. By stating that Ezra had a car and would often give Jason rides, the idea is that their arrangement was a bit more tit for tat than the prosecution led the jury to believe. This argument is pretty lackluster, as giving someone a ride every now and then is not equal to the other person paying for all of your living expenses. But again, the lawyer is fighting an uphill battle with one hand tied behind their back.
And when you met her, you also met her parents eventually, right?
Yes.
And you formed a bond really with her father.
Which father are we speaking of?
I'm talking about Joe Shane Carl.
Yes, Joe's, yep.
Joe, the man who adopted her.
Yes,
That's who she calls dad,
yes.
not a biological dad.
Negative, yeah.
Okay, she had never,
I'd never met her biological father.
she hadn't met him either, right?
As to my knowledge, no.
You met her father and you actually would confide things in her father. And by her father, I'm always referring to Joe Shane Carlin, just so we're clear, okay? You would confide in him, right?
From time to time, yeah.
You would tell him things about you and Ezra.
I would,
You would tell him concerns you had about Ezra.
I would.
And it was easy to bond with him man to man.
I mean, I bond pretty well with most people, but
But you did bond well with Joe Shane, right?
not like more than anyone else, but yes,
And he's about the same age as you.
approximately, I'm assuming.
So one thing you knew about Ezra was that she was young and impressionable, right?
I wouldn't say impressionable, but she was young.
She was vulnerable.
She wasn't vulnerable.
You are,
This is likely Jason's impression of Ezra now, which is extremely different from how he saw her when they were dating. We know for a fact, based on text messages and evidence presented at trial, that Jason believed that his girlfriend was extremely vulnerable when they were together. Ezra acted vulnerable whenever it would benefit her, and it's only through hindsight that Jason can so confidently say that she was not that way.
more worldly than Ezra McCandless. Wouldn't that be fair to say?
Worldly isn't in like my age, yes. Like I've lived more of a life than her, yes.
You've traveled.
I've traveled,
You've been in the military.
been in the military,
You've gone outside the state of Wisconsin.
yes,
You've not only been to the Redwoods, but to other places.
yes.
You've been to places that, for her, it's just a dream to have gone to some of those places, right?
I wouldn't say a dream. Everything's
A goal?
a goal, yeah.
Okay.
Jason can't call out what the defense attorney is trying to do here, but he does slightly address the goofier language she is using. She is attempting to make Ezra seem like a wide-eyed, innocent child who was just entering the world for the first time. That Ezra, the woman who would go on to murder her ex-boyfriend, was so incredibly young and naive that the very idea of going into the Redwoods seemed like a dream to her. Going outside of Wisconsin, seeing the world, it was so far out of the realm of possibilities that she couldn't even conceptualize it. But that is so clearly not the case.
And you wanted to protect Ezra, right?
I want to protect everyone.
Well, I'm talking about your relationship with Ezra, so that's what I want to say. In general, your relationship with her, you saw yourself as protecting her.
I saw myself as protecting her, yes.
Okay. And in fact, let me just say this. When Ezra moved back home after she left you,
Yes.
moved out of your house, there was an enormous amount of texting that went back and forth between you and her.
Yes.
Right? She didn't have a cell phone that she could just pick up her cell phone and call you and talk.
She could.
Well, she didn't have a cell phone. There was a house phone at her parents', but her mode of communication was an iPod at that time.
She
right?
could call through the text app, or she could text through the text app.
Okay, but she needed Wi-Fi to do that.
Yes.
And through the Instagram text app, there was a constant, the last few weeks of March, before everything happened here, there was a lot of texting between you and her.
Yes.
And during that texting, one of the things that you said to her on March 11th is, well, your Instagram name is the Doc Wolf.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And you said to her, I'm a wolf protecting a fawn.
I don't recall that specifically, but if I can look at it.
Okay.
What Instagram page, Counsel?
I'm about to bring it over to you. That would be page 1189.
That's okay, I'll just pull it up here, thank you.
Okay, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 687.
Where are we at?
It seems that Jason's testimony the other day has still upset Ezra, as she is back to glaring at him stoically. Thankfully, this time she chose not to wear something to try and psychologically torment her ex, which is kind, I guess. Small steps forward. What the defense is trying to do here is strange, because obviously Jason would no longer feel that she needed to be protected now that he knows the truth about what had happened, both in the relationship and with Alex's murder. He already stated both in the prosecution's line of questioning, as well as moments before, that he did view her as being vulnerable, but now sees her in a different light. So the evidence that she is submitting to the court, where he states something similar at the time, is almost laughable. Again, the case against Ezra is airtight. We know she killed Alex. We know he never attacked her. And we know that she injured herself in order to make her story more believable.
Wish I had a pen, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So, like before, we read from the bottom up.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay? And so if you go here to about 2/3 of the way up the page, the date is March 11th. Do you see that?
I see that.
And you are the author, the Doc Wolf,
That is
right?
me.
I'm a wolf protecting a fawn.
Yeah, I see that.
And then the next thing you wrote to her is, or a fox with another.
Yes.
Okay. And Judge, I'll just display this to the jury. I'd move in Exhibit 687.
Any objection to Exhibit 687?
I would ask that it be shown in its entirety, not just an isolated message.
That's fine. I have no problem with that.
And in how many pages would be the entire?
It's one page, page 1189. Oh, this has to be worn up.
All right, that'll be
Warm up, excuse me.
received. 687 received.
Okay.
May
So,
publish.
starting at the bottom of that page, it starts with her saying to you, that is true, right?
Whatever the context of that is.
Okay. And then there's something that's a text, but it's just a bunch of empty boxes.
Probably emojis.
What?
They're probably emojis. I think that's how they show up.
Oh, okay. So we can't really tell what those are, right?
No, negative.
And she's talking to you about making love to you. She says, I'm a garden when I'm making love to you. Right?
Yes.
That's the next thing she says. And then the next thing she says is, as cheesy and dumb as I am. Right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's after that you say, I'm a wolf protecting a fawn,
Yes.
or a fox with another.
Yes.
And then you say to her, the first is a little odd.
What is a little?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should move the page down. My apologies.
Probably referring to the wolf protecting a fawn.
Well, it's your words. I
That's
don't.
what. Yeah, my words are probably saying a wolf protecting a fawn is the first is probably a little odd.
Okay, nothing further. Move in 687.
It's been received.
Thank you. So, let me just say something about you and protecting. You're a medic
Yes.
in the military, right?
Yes.
And that means that your job is to heal people.
My job is to do no further harm. That's our credo.
Okay, we all know the first words of doctors or the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm, right?
Yes.
Okay, but within that, do no harm, it goes more than that. It also goes to try and treat people and heal people if you can.
But it's not our job to fix people.
Your job is to fix their wounds when you're a medic in the military.
Fix their wounds, but people aren't like bicycles. You can't fix somebody.
Fair enough, but you can fix certain parts, right?
You can help them and you can give them options, but it's their own choice to fix their lives or themselves.
It's obvious that what happened in his relationship with Ezra has deeply affected how Jason views the world through this statement alone. The defense isn't wrong for bringing up how he saw Ezra and how he viewed his role in other people's lives. In every example we are given through this case and trial, Jason would put himself and his own needs last, while working incredibly hard to help the people around him. Ezra lied, cheated, and psychologically tormented him for months, but he was still willing to help her if she so much as asked. Alex was in a months-long affair with his girlfriend and had actively lied to his face, and when he was called to help him, he immediately sprang into action. In the day prior, he went so far as to say that while he didn't like Alex, John, or Ezra when he found out what they had done, he still had the capacity to love them. At the time of Alex's murder, Jason did seem to want to fix people, more or less, but now he is adamant that people cannot be fixed, the way that he once thought, and it's not his responsibility to do so. That is tremendous growth, and he should be proud of himself.
Okay, I'm talking about wounds, like when somebody cuts themselves as a medic and they need stitches, you can stitch them up in the military,
To the best of your abilities, depending on like your care level, yes.
Okay. And you, to some extent, wanted to do that with Ezra.
I wanted to see her grow. I wanted to see, I knew she was capable of many things, so I saw potential in her, especially her art.
Okay, so you thought she was a good artist?
Yeah, I thought she was exceptional for the amount of effort she had to put in. The results were like exceptional, you know.
She was young, but she was a really good artist.
She was very good.
She was too young to go to a bar, but she was certainly a good artist, right?
Yes, yeah.
Now, sometimes when you would go with Ezra and she was driving the car, she would get very anxious. Fair?
She had, I wouldn't call it PTSD, but she had anxiety that dealt with.
Okay. You're a medic, not a psychiatrist, right?
No.
Not a psychologist, right? So it would be fair to say, with all due respect to you, sir, that you're not really in a position to diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder.
No, I'm not diagnosing.
Okay, right. That's somebody with one of those training and those degrees are the people who have to do that, right?
Yes, could I say anxiety?
All right. You did?
Okay,
You can say whatever you want. I'm just asking questions.
Roger.
Before we continue, I mentioned this only briefly in our initial coverage because it did not seem relevant, but early on in their relationship, Ezra got into a small car accident. The accident wasn't bad by any means, but afterward, Ezra stated that she had amnesia and began to refer to herself by the name Monica. Now, either two things happened. The first is obvious, that she got into a car accident, hit her head, and temporarily forgot who she was. Post-traumatic amnesia is a real thing and has been documented in other legitimate cases. But what's more likely, based on who Ezra is and how she acts, is that she got into a car accident and saw an opportunity. Now, an opportunity to do what? Who knows? I'm not her. But given her propensity to create fantastical lies around her to make herself seem more interesting, it doesn't seem to be that much of a stretch to believe that a car accident as inconsequential as this one wouldn't leave her with a traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, except for things the judge says you can't testify about. All
Within
right.
limits. Still getting used to this.
Okay, we get that. When she would get emotional in the car and was driving, sometimes you would take over the driving, right?
At times. It wasn't
Yes.
safe otherwise.
Pardon me?
It wouldn't be safe otherwise.
Right, and she would say to you, I want you to take over, Jason. I don't want to drive.
Yes.
She was emotional, and you would do that. You would take over and you would drive her car. right?
Yes.
Okay, so you certainly had a driver's license, even though you didn't have a
Yeah,
vehicle.
I just did. I prefer not to drive.
Okay, but you would do it when she wanted you to, right?
For our safety, yes.
And that happened more than once.
I would say it was a limited amount of occasions, but it wasn't like it happened all the time when she drove.
No, it just happened when she got very emotional or there was some touchy and anxious things going on, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let me ask you some questions about races. You'd been, when you met Ezra McCandless, you'd been part of the races crowd for quite a while, right?
I wouldn't know how long, but yeah, I was there for quite a bit.
But she was a newbie to races.
Yeah, we kind of, through our friendship, she was inducted into the crew.
Into the crew. The crew there is not uniform, right?
No.
There's differences of opinion,
Many.
and although many people are friendly, not everybody is equally friendly to each other, right?
I would say there is an amount of cattiness, but there's always respect, I guess.
Okay, so about this cattiness, I mean, the way you talked about races yesterday, you almost seemed like you were referring to it as like a family, right?
Oh, definitely.
And sometimes in families, there are tensions and people don't like each other all the time.
Yeah, but you always love each other.
And even then, people sometimes gossip, right?
Gossip.
Races was gossipy, wasn't it?
Yes.
There's a lot of he said, she said stuff going on there, right?
Yes.
And to use an old cliche, like the game telephone, where one person repeats something to another, you know,
Lost in translation.
lost in translation, not bad intent, but the facts get turned around a little bit, right?
Yes.
And sometimes people think somebody did something wrong, but they're wrong because they've just heard too much gossip. Fair enough?
Fair.
Okay. And so Ezra was newer, but not everybody there. A lot of people really liked her, but not everybody. Fair?
I mean, to my knowledge, she was pretty well received.
All right. Now, yesterday you testified about things that happened with John, right?
John Hanson.
John Hanson.
Yes.
Yes. And I'm going to come back to that later, but one of the things that happened after you talked to John Hanson, well, you got on the phone with him and he told you he'd never had sex with Ezra, right?
Yes.
And he went around races telling that to people too.
I can't know if he did that or not, but I don't know. That just seems, I can't.
But you knew when he first told you that he had denied having sex with Ezra, right?
Yes.
And he certainly, in your opinion, didn't want to be seen as having sex with your girlfriend out in public, right?
In that first interaction, he admitted to it at the end of it, though.
At the end of it, but initially he denied it, right?
Initially, he denied it.
And you heard through Josh Trankler that he was denying it to other people too.
I believe I might have. I don't recall specifically, but
Okay. Let me ask you some questions about the abortion. I know it's a tough subject, okay?
yes.
When you found out she was pregnant, that was a time of stress and turmoil in the relationship. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't say it was stressful. It was just, it was a situation where she was having a hard time getting her footing, holding an occupation, and then she was sick. So I just wanted to know, like, how I could help.
She was sick and she had lost a lot of weight,
Yes.
right? She was vomiting every day.
Yes.
Neither one of you knew why.
No, I didn't know
Right.
for sure.
It was kind of exceptional. And before she even went to the doctor, she got a home pregnancy test.
I did not know this, though.
Okay, so when before she got the abortion, or about the abortion, there wasn't that much communication between the two of you about it, right?
About what?
The abortion, in advance.
Why would there be communication about?
I don't know, I can't answer questions about what happened with other people, I wasn't there. but
What I'm stating is if I didn't know she was pregnant, why would we be talking about abortions?
I'm talking about once you knew she was pregnant.
There was no conversation.
There was no conversation.
She asked for paperwork from the nurse, and I shut my mouth.
It would be biased of me to not point out that Jason does not like the defense attorney. Though the change is slight, he continues to make it a point to correct the attorney's language and second-guess her questions in a way that he did not do with the prosecuting attorney. Mind you, he's not being directly confrontational or aggressive like Nancy Brophy or Tony Todd, but he is more direct than he had been the day prior.
She was actually under the impression that you did not want her
Objection
to
calls
have
for
the baby.
speculation.
Sustained.
Mr. Mengel, in the middle of March, you were interviewed by Detective Propp, right?
I was interviewed by a lot of people, so
Okay, I'm not talking about after Alex died, I'm talking about before Alex died.
during the
Okay.
investigation, or
When, in the middle of March, after what John had done to Ezra came to light, you were interviewed by the police.
yes.
Right, and the person who interviewed you was Detective Ryan Propp.
Yes.
Same detective who is sitting in court today,
Yes.
correct? I'd ask the record to reflect, and he's sitting here behind the prosecution table with a black suit.
The record will so reflect.
Okay. Oh, I wanted to reflect that he's identified, that Mr. Mengel has identified Detective Propp.
Okay, well, all right.
Thank you.
Is that your understanding, sir?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, then the record will reflect he's identified him. I was just letting the record reflect that Detective Prock has been allowed to remain in court throughout the trial.
When you talked to Detective Prock, you gave him background information about your relationship with Ezra McCandless, right?
Yes.
He was asking you questions and you were giving him answers, right?
Yes.
You were filling him in on things that had happened between you and Ezra,
Yes.
about the ups and downs of your relationship with her.
Yes.
And in the course of filling him in, what you told Detective Prock is that Ezra thought for sure you
Objection
didn't
calls for
want.
speculation.
It's what
Hold
he's.
on, just stop. Ho.
The follow-up question will.
Okay, well, yeah, this question is, I'm not going to sustain the objection to this question, but if
But the
going down.
question's almost done, if I can just
Okay,
finish it, and there
you
is
go
no
ahead and finish
follow-up
the question.
Okay. What you told Detective Prock on that day,
I'm going to object on hearsay grounds, Judge.
Sustained on hearsay.
can I have a sidebar, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Mengel, when she had the abortion, that was traumatic to her, right?
Yes.
And I think yesterday you talked about how during the abortion, she didn't want you to be in the room, right?
Yeah, she changed her mind on the way there.
You had come in as the supportive boyfriend, right?
Yes.
But she did not want you to be a witness to this destruction of life.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Judge, can we approach? Counsel, do you want to bring VVV with you again?
I can do that.
All right.
You may answer as to what.
I'm going to repeat
Go ahead,
the
rephrase the question.
Yeah, let me just do that. So, Mr. Mengel, when you drove her and you said she changed her mind, right?
Yes.
So you said to her, do you not want me there? You said something like that, right?
To that, yeah.
And what she said was, I don't want you to see any of this stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Now, after this abortion, which was traumatic to her, she wanted you near her, right? Not during the abortion, but in the aftermath, in the relationship.
Yeah.
You went to sleeping on the couch, right?
At times, yes.
Okay. But what you told us yesterday was when you were sleeping on the couch, she wanted you to be with her in the bed, right?
Yes.
She wanted your comfort.
Yes.
She wanted your love.
Yes.
And there were times when you felt that you needed to separate yourself from her. Fair?
Yeah. Yes.
And one of the things that you did, in fact, after this abortion, you even thought she was going through like postpartum depression over it, right?
Yeah.
And you went on this trip to clear your head with your friend Josh Trinkler, right? And when you went with Josh Trinkler, I think you told us the whole plane route and the redwoods and how that was a great space for you, right?
Yeah.
And it could have been longer than a week that you went away, right?
I mean, with travel time, I'm not completely sure on the.
You don't have a calendar showing the exact dates, right?
No, I think I wrote it down, but I don't have an exact recollection.
Well, yesterday in court, I don't want you to take this as attacking you at all, but you just made a mistake when you said how long you were gone for military duty in February. You remembered it was 2 or 3 weeks when it was really only 9 days, February 5th to the 14th, right?
Yes.
So similarly, this trip that you took with Josh Trankler out to the redwoods, out to nature, it was kind of a spiritual reawakening for you. Would you say that?
I wouldn't say spiritual. It is just
Personal?
personal.
Fair? Could have been longer than just a week that you were gone.
It could have been.
Okay. So you're gone, you're in the redwoods, and she's home alone, right?
Yes.
Again, the defense attorney is attempting to recontextualize how the jury views Ezra. Instead of seeing a manipulative young woman who cheated on her boyfriend with his closest friends, lied to him about it for months, falsely accused both friends of abusing her and everything else, she is painting a softer portrait, that of a young woman in her first real relationship, going through a tense emotional turmoil after getting an abortion and having the people in her life abandon her. The abortion could have very well been traumatic for Ezra, but given her track record for lying, it's very hard to believe that this is the case. Even if you were primed and wanted to believe Ezra, her own actions and words counteract every claim she has made, and there is no amount of recontextualization that can fix that.
Now, I'm going to ask you some questions about Alex, all right?
Alexander Woodworth.
Alexander Woodworth. Thank you for clarifying that. Well, you had an Alexander Zink who was your roommate, right?
Yes.
Alexander Woodworth was somebody you knew as part of the Racy's crowd.
Yes.
He was a guy who would sit in the corner reading books and writing in journals.
Often. Yes.
And he was often kind of almost like a loner to himself a lot, right?
I wouldn't call him a loner.
Well, not when he was working. He was a sociable guy, but he liked to spend time with himself writing in his notebooks.
Yeah, he would have headphones and stuff in a lot. It's kind of like it's an implied task, I guess you could say, if you're at a coffee shop studying or doing some work and you have earphones and you're working on something.
He would write journals.
Often, yes.
You saw copies of those journals?
Briefly at bars from time to time, he would show me his works.
He didn't read you long passages, right?
He didn't recite them to me, but he would let me read them.
And you found his writings very painful, right?
Well, he's a philosopher.
And he expressed what you called entropy, disorder, and pain in his writings. That was your impression.
I would say he had a specific eye for the world, and we don't always see it through the same lens. I can't really speculate.
But his writings, right, you're not a nihilist, right?
No,
And he was a nihilist.
I can't say that he was anything.
Well, you thought some of his writings were really brutal, didn't you?
I thought that, but I'm also not trained. I'm not like an English professor.
Right. I'm just talking about your impression. I'm not trying to get you to be a professor.
This is just speculation, but it seems that the defense attorney's constant objections the day prior and her repeatedly telling him what he could and couldn't say the day prior really bothered him, because every time she implies that he made a determination that is outside his particular skill set, he tells her he is not qualified to say that. It's kind of comical to watch, as Jason doesn't appear to be a confrontational person based on everything we've seen in the case, meaning him talking to her like this is akin to him fighting someone. Again, when we have reviewed past cases, we've seen people who are more confrontational and prone to anger than Jason, so examining a person who is fairly reserved is a change of pace. It's also just kind of funny to watch him dissent ever so slightly and make her job a little bit harder.
Okay.
Okay? His writings were very personal sometimes.
Yeah, they were very personal.
They were not just philosophy in the abstract like a professor would teach a class. They were about him and his feelings quite a bit, seen through the philosophy lens, right?
I don't know if he was always referring these things to himself. I don't think people always have to write about themselves.
Okay, whatever you think about what people always have to write, some of Alex's writings were personal, right? And painful.
I wouldn't know. Like, I didn't ask him if these were personal memoirs. It never stated his name. Like,
Right, he didn't say, I, Alex Woodworth, believe blah, blah, blah in his journals, but he would use the word I at various times, right?
well, if you're writing a narrative, you have to have a narrator, right?
I don't know, I'm not a writer.
I'm just assuming that's how it works.
Okay, so these two hate each other.
He certainly didn't tell you about anything he wrote in his journals concerning Ezra McCandless, right?
No, I had no impressions about any of that stuff.
I mean, that wasn't something he was going to share with you, right?
I would assume not, no.
And when you would read them, you would find his writings brutal and pessimistic sometimes.
When we're talking about when I viewed his writings, this is far before him and Ezra McCandless's relations. Our friendship kind of lost touch, and we weren't as there wasn't as much camaraderie, I guess. We still talked. We were still respectful of each other, but he didn't reach out as much as he used to.
And in other words, he wasn't really comfortable about opening up about his life with you. Fair to say?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Can I approach?
Yes. Okay. Objection is overruled,
Okay.
and the witness may answer in the manner discussed at sidebar.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. I'll repeat the question because we've probably all forgotten it by now. What you felt, you never felt like Alex was comfortable opening up with you completely about what happened in his childhood and his life. He had other friends for that, right? That's how you felt.
I think he had other confidants that were much closer, yes.
So your answer to my question is yes.
Yes.
You talked yesterday about Ezra and Alex, and what you said was you believed they both shared a painful and traumatic history with each other, right?
I wouldn't say they both shared a painful traumatic history, I guess, but
Well, that they shared their personal pain and trauma with each other. That's what you said in court yesterday, right?
I might have said that, but I can't remember.
You don't remember your exact words, but
No.
you're not denying that you said that yesterday.
No, they had
Fair?
commonality, I guess you could say.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about when Alex cut his wrists.
Yes.
All right. He cut his wrists, and Ezra called you over to treat it, right?
Yeah, she might have messaged me or called me, I can't recall.
Either way,
Yeah.
she's the one who got in touch with you,
Yes,
right? And she asked you to come and help Alex because he had slit his wrist.
yes.
You went over there and you saw the mark, right?
I believe it was
You think it was the right wrist?
I can't recall specifically. but
Okay. Whichever wrist it is, the mark that he made when he slit his wrist went across his wrist, correct?
Yeah, which is uncommon for, look, I'm not going to give my medical.
You're not a suicide
Yeah,
expert.
no, I'm not.
Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Your belief is that that gesture would be a cry for help, as
Yes.
opposed to actually one wanting to do away with
And I,
themselves.
I spoke with him about it, yes.
Okay. And when you talked to him about it, he was playing it off to you like it was an accident, right?
Yes, he said he had been.
He was drunk, a knife slipped, something like that, right?
He didn't realize the sharpness is what he said.
But you weren't buying that.
No.
You saw it and you're like, you knew from your training experience, this is no accident.
Judge, I'm going to
This
object. The defense counsel's made clear that he's not an expert in this area, so he shouldn't be giving an opinion on that.
happened. It's a lay opinion.
Sustained. Well,
All right. In your
we're not
lay
allowing
opinion.
lay opinions.
Okay. What?
We're not allowing lay opinions with respect to certain areas.
Oh, I
And,
thought that was about emotional states, not actions. But I'll move on, Judge, if you want me to.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
She didn't think it was about emotional states and not actions, because she used the same objection when talking about actions the day prior. Not to point this out to give her a demerit or undue criticism. This is just something that lawyers do often. I just thought it was funny she lied to the judge just now, and I also find this entire back and forth to be incredibly comical. A man was murdered, multiple people were falsely accused of abuse and rape, and the result is this passive-aggressive back and forth between two people who can't actually say or do anything to resolve the tension.
What you said to Alex, well, first of all, yesterday I believe you described these wounds as shallow, right?
Yeah, it wasn't very far past, those are the
You remember, you've been through, after Mr. Woodworth died, you had a couple of different interviews with police officers, correct?
correct.
And when you were interviewing, you remember talking to Investigator Dykus and Investigator Meyer?
Were they the Dunn County sheriffs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember speaking with them, even if you may not remember their names?
I remember speaking with detectives from Dunn County, yes.
And do you recall telling Investigator Dykus, when talking about this, that Alex's wound to his wrist was very deep?
Very deep?
Your words, yes.
I might have said it was in the marbling or something. I don't recall saying very deep, but
Okay. I'm going to show you what's a transcript that's been prepared of that interview. All right? And I'm just going to direct your attention. This is page 55.
I see this.
All right, yes. You're talking to
Yeah, I see this.
Investigator Dykus, right? And he's asking you about Alex's attempted suicide, right?
I'm sorry, Counselor, what line are you looking at?
Page, line 16. And
I'm,
page 55, line 16.
there are two interviews with the same officers. and
That's F.
Thank you.
What you said to Investigator Dykus in talking about it is because, like, it was very deep, correct?
That's what it says on the transcript.
You might not remember, but you know you were being recorded when you talked to him, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you were aware that Alex had, like, played it off to you, right? As something else, right?
He said it was, yeah.
And
Excellent.
at work, he told people it was a steam wand injury from making coffee, right?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
It's not speculative, Judge. Do you want
That's
me to
hearsay.
Go
Well-
over the transcript. I have an argument I can make at sidebar about its admissibility.
So is it, are you asking him about what Mr. Woodworth had said, or what he had heard in terms of what other people said Alex said?
Let me just double check, okay?
Okay.
Let me just say this. You had given Mr. Woodworth something to wrap around the wound to keep it clean, right?
Yeah, I gave him equipment to maintain it.
Right. And he went to work with that covering, right?
Objection. again, it calls for speculation or it's hearsay.
Well, I think it's a lack of, foundation as to personal knowledge. Does he?
Did you know that he had gone to work with you had wrapped it, correct?
I had wrapped it, yes.
You had given him Dermabond.
I used some kind of thing to,
Okay. And then you had wrapped it to keep it clean, right?
yes.
But important to keep a wound clean.
Yeah, I irrigated and cleaned it.
All right. And you were told, or did you know personally, that he had gone to work with it wrapped up?
I had heard he was wearing a dressing, but I don't know if it was the same dressing that I
Okay.
had.
And you heard people at Racy's talk about what he said about his wound,
Then I'll
correct?
sustain on hearsay.
Thank you.
I'd like to approach.
Okay. Is sustained?
Fair to say that as far as you knew, Alex wasn't going around Racy's bragging about a suicide attempt, right?
Not to my knowledge.
And fair to say, as far as you knew, Alex wasn't going around Racy's saying, I'm having a relationship with Ezra McCandless, right?
I mean, I don't know, but I would assume he wouldn't do the same thing.
And you, however, let me just say this. After this happened, Ezra McCandless said he sliced his wrist because she wouldn't leave you for Alex. She told you that, right?
Yes, she said.
And she told you that, and you knew about Alex way before February of 2018.
What are you implying?
You knew that Alex Woodworth was having a relationship with Ezra McCandless before February when you had your encounter with him at Racy's.
I had impressions that they had become very close. I wasn't fully
Well-
I had an idea that something was going on.
You had a roommate, Alex Zink, who was telling you Ezra wasn't coming home at night when you were out of town, right?
Well, she would be telling me one thing and then other
But
people.
I'm asking what Alex Zink told you. He would tell you she wasn't coming home at night, correct?
The nights that she said she was at the house, he said she was not.
And in fact, what he said to you, what you talked, again, you talked to Detective Dykus about this, correct?
I might have, yes.
When you talked to Alex and you believed it was a suicide attempt, you said to him, look, you were telling him not to do this, right?
I asked him if he needed help, if I should call somebody.
One of the things you said to him is,
Sorry,
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
asked him if he needed help and I didn't get your last one.
If I should call somebody or if he wanted to see.
and you said to him, look, you only get one shot at this.
Yes.
And by one shot at this, you didn't mean one shot at slitting his wrist, you meant one shot at life.
At life, yes.
Now, you talked about this with investigators Dykus and Meyer, right? You talked to them a couple of different
I
times,
talked to
right?
so many law enforcement agents.
It's a little
but
hard
yes,
for you to remember
it's all-
exactly. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're fine. It's all like a soup of conversations.
Okay, so in the soup of conversation, some of the soup of this conversations you had were shortly after Ezra was in the hospital and Alex Woodworth had been discovered to be deceased, right?
Before and after he was discovered, yes.
Okay. All right, let's play. And you had a conversation with these investigators on March 27th, so 5 days after you last saw Alex, right?
I'm sure I probably did.
Madam Clerk, can you turn it to my computer, please?
And Judge, we will mark and move to admit this later. We'll tie this up afterwards for the record.
Is the
But
state
this-
aware of what it is?
Yes.
Yes, assuming,
It's
I believe
DOJ.
council's going to play the audio portion of a transcript she showed me. I don't have an objection to that portion being played.
That's all we're gonna play. Okay, so just for the record, this is what the state has provided is GOJW, and we are playing from 16 minutes and 12 seconds to 17 minutes and 6 seconds. This is an interview by investigators Dicus, D-I-C-U-S, and Meyer, M-A-Y-E-R, of Jason Mengel on March 27th.
Press play.
Okay.
He had said that, I mean, I bandaged him up once when he slit his wrist. Okay. Because he said, if you don't leave him, I'm going to kill myself. What do you mean leave him? Was he talking about you? Okay. So, like, I went over to the house, and this was months ago, I can't remember when, but I had cleaned up his wound and bandaged him all up, and I sat and had a talk with him about, do we need to go in and do something? Yeah. People are not going to understand that this was an act, because he said, I got drunk and I accidentally cut myself with a knife that I got for Christmas. And I was like, this is a really weird place to accidentally cut yourself. Where was that at then? On the wrist? Okay. And I was like, this is not a place you accidentally cut yourself out. Okay. And he's like, no, you have to believe me, it was just an accident. I was holding his hands. Like, I knew he was cheating on me. I knew what was going on. Okay. Like, relationship-wise. I didn't kick her out. I didn't be mean to him. Like, in public. We were still all friends. Okay. I just knew there were two people that...
It went a line beyond that. But
And do you know what the time stamp was when it completed?
Mr. Nelson probably does.
Judge, I started playing it at 16:12 and I pressed pause at 17:06. I think you can see it on the screen there.
Oh, okay. Well, then that was the correct time.
Very good, thank you.
So, in other words, you're talking to investigator Dicus 5 days after Alex is gone, and you're telling him months ago you knew that she was cheating on you and you didn't kick her out.
I think at that time, I knew there was something going on, but now that I had the relevant facts, it all made sense. Like, I started to see the signs of, like, you know, the red people wear the rose-colored glasses, and you just assume, like, oh, she wasn't lying about this, or she was actually at the...
What you told investigator Dicus is what we heard your words on the tape. Correct, Mr. Mengel? There's no arguing with you said that, right?
But I'm also speaking.
Mr. Mengel, there's no arguing with the fact that you said that, right?
No.
Okay, I don't mean to be rude, but I want to move on.
Again, their back and forth is interesting to watch, because he isn't denying that he said that. He is simply stating now he views things differently, which is normal, because your ex killed a person. It might recontextualize your time together. But she attempts to shut that down, while also indicating that he is not answering the question or somehow lying. Had she been successful in this attempt, she could have made Jason look like the liar in the relationship, as if he was the one manipulating his naive girlfriend, abusing her and leaving her alone in her time of need, but she wasn't. Jason wasn't being argumentative. He wasn't lying on the stand. He was simply answering the question to the best of his ability.
One of the things that excuse me 1 second, Your Honor. Just don't want to get my pages confused. You smoked cigarettes, right?
Yes.
And so did Mr. Woodworth?
Yes.
And I guess you probably can't smoke in races, but you go outside to smoke, right? There's no smoking inside the establishment
No, it's
itself.
not inside the establishment.
But it's common to go outside and have a smoke.
It's common.
And you would bum cigarettes from Alex.
We'd bum from each other.
And when you would go bum a smoke from him, you didn't do it just because you wanted a cigarette. You did it for other reasons, didn't you?
What are you implying?
Well, you would say to yourself in your head, yeah, like you're taking things of mine and I'll just take some things of yours. That's what was in your head, right?
No.
All right. Again, you talked to investigators Dicus and Meyer twice, right?
Yes.
Mr. Mengel, when you talked to those investigators, it was a long interview, both times, right?
All the times it was long, yes.
And it was long and you filled in lots and lots of details, right?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
I mean, you even went into details sometimes about like whether you had pizza.
Yeah, I rant sometimes.
Okay.
It's not uncommon.
And when you were talking, you were truthful with the police, right?
To the best of my knowledge.
You weren't trying to lie to the police.
I had nothing to hide.
And what you said in this truthful conversation with the police about finding out about Ezra seeing Alex is, you said you had found out through the grapevine, right?
Judge, may we approach?
All right.
Mr. Mengel, I'm going to show you what's marked as 6A9. I'm sorry for being repetitive.
No, you're fine.
This is a transcript of your conversation with investigators Dykus and Meyer, right?
This was done exclusively the day when I had the conversation with him and Hanson. It's not like this was a regular, I would bum smokes from him to be mean.
Okay, well,
That's out of context.
I didn't hear that.
That was out of context, I was saying.
Wait.
This was specifically the day where I talked with Hanson and Alexander Woodworth outside of Racy's.
And what you told investigated Dykus was that you were, pardon my language, kind of a dick about bumming the cigarettes,
Yeah,
right? You
just
said
this
that.
one day. Yeah, I was kind of rude.
But I'm talking about the one day. I'm talking about what
Yes.
you said, okay? And you said you know, and again, pardon my language, after you said you were kind of a dick about it, you said you were expressing what was in your head, not what you had said to Alex Woodworth, right?
Yeah,
Like, you're taking things of mine, and I'll just take something of yours, man. Right?
yeah,
You
that's
told that to the police, right?
I believe I even stated that to Alexander, but
Oh, okay.
What the fuck kind of argument is that? I'm at a loss for words. Simply because that line of thinking is so weird, especially in context. Jason didn't bum cigarettes off of Alex as a form of revenge because he slept with Ezra. That's just what you do when you don't have a cigarette, but you want one. Jason clearly said this as a sort of passive-aggressive, bitchy statement while confronting the two men who slept with his girlfriend behind his back, and are clearly not sorry about it at all. Can't really blame him. Are we supposed to hear that statement and think that Jason is now a bad person, or that he genuinely believed those two things were similar? Because that is so... I can't even think of the words for it. That is truly such a bad argument, I have no idea why it was made. If anything is clear in this case, it's the fact that Jason is kind of too understanding in these situations. He's forgiving in a way that feels excessive. And if the worst thing he can say was that he bummed a cigarette off of Alex in a bitchy way because he slept with his girlfriend, I don't think that makes him a bad guy.
Now, when you had your confrontation with Mr. Woodworth, all right, 1 second. All right, so it's fair to say, given all of this, that you knew, you may not have had a videotape, Ezra McCandless may not have told you, but you really knew that she and Alex were seeing each other, and you knew it for a while before February.
I was in denial, yes.
You knew it in your gut,
Yes.
right? And you didn't kick her out,
No.
right? Back in December. And let me ask you some questions now. And actually, when you went and talked to Alex in February, Ezra had already moved out of your house, right?
I believe she was already moved out, yes.
We'll come back to that. I'm going to ask you some questions now about John Hanson,
Okay.
all right? When you described John as a very good friend of yours, right?
Yes.
Unlike Alex, who's somebody you were more remote with.
We were still good friends, but not as close.
You felt very betrayed that John had sex with your girlfriend, right?
It wasn't betrayal as the situation.
Well, it was the situation that he assaulted her, right?
Yeah, the accusation.
Right.
That's what made me.
And you used that word a lot yesterday. You said he assaulted her, he assaulted her. You used that word when you were talking about it, right?
That's what the defendant had told me.
That's, okay. That's Miss McCandless, okay? The
Ezra
state may
McCandless.
want to call her the defendant. I'm calling her Ezra McCandless,
Roger.
all right?
At this point, the defense attorney is being needlessly pedantic. Jason didn't have to call Ezra by her name. He can call her the defendant if he wants to, and correcting him as if he did something wrong is pointless. Again, these two simply don't like each other, and while it's been amusing, her correcting him over this just feels stupid. I'm going to skip ahead a bit because their dynamic continues this way in a manner that becomes fairly aggravating to watch. Again, a link to the original upload will be left in the description box, should you want to watch the entire back and forth, as the prosecution gets involved and it becomes an entire mess.
Now, you went on military duty on February 5th, and you know this because you kept a calendar, right?
At the time of the incident, yeah, I wrote down a lot of hard dates.
So when John assaulted Ezra, that didn't happen until after you left for military duty. It didn't happen before you went, right?
I don't recall a specific date, but
You weren't in town.
I was not in town. No.
You had actually asked John to look after Ezra, right?
Yeah, I trusted my friends.
Pardon me?
I trusted my friends.
Right. You trusted your friends, and the very next day, he has sex with her, right?
I didn't know this at the time, no. But
I know you didn't know it at the time, but you came to find out it was the very next day, right?
I found out what she had said, yes.
And you found out that there was a repeated incident on February 6th, the day after that?
That's
Right?
Yeah, that's what
And on February 7th, she moved out.
I believe so.
And in fact, basically, she had a phone call with you. You testified about that yesterday, right?
Which phone call?
When she moved out. She called you and told you she's moving out, right?
Yes, yeah,
And in your words, she dumped you.
pretty much.
Okay. And she expressed that she just couldn't stay with you anymore, right?
She said I could not be in that apartment.
Okay. So she says she couldn't be there. It's not till later till you find out why, right?
Later on, she said, yeah, it had to do with other things.
Okay. And to your knowledge, she moved back to Stanley, right?
I believe so.
Back to her mother's house, right?
She had sent me an image or so from her mother's house.
So you knew where she was, right?
I mean, I assumed it.
You knew Alex helped her move to Stanley?
Negative. I didn't know that.
All right. That's something you found out later.
Yes.
And so you're broken up at this point, right?
I was a little distraught, yes.
Well, it was more than a little distraught. I mean, this was somebody you thought about having a future with, as you said yesterday, right?
Yeah, I cared very much.
This was somebody you guys would joke around and like husband-wife stuff, right?
Yes.
And so you were distraught and you were looking for an explanation as to what happened.
Yeah, nothing made sense.
Okay, and that's why you went and looked at her Instagram, right?
I don't recall when I looked at her Instagram. It wasn't until later on.
A couple of weeks later, well, this incident with the police at Josh Trankler's, that happened on
Yeah.
February 26th, right?
Yes.
So if we go February 7th to February 26th, we're talking about like 2.5 weeks or so, between 2.5 weeks and 3 weeks later. Fair?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you look at her Instagram, right?
It might have been Instagram. Yeah.
You screenshotted it.
That was the text app, not the Instagram.
Okay, so you look at it and you screenshot it, right?
Yes.
All right. And after that, you're talking to her, right?
Yes.
She starts crying.
Yes.
She tells you what happened,
She
right?
told me a story.
She told you what she said happened, right?
And then she amended it after I talked with him on the phone.
Well, you called him and he said, no, I never had sex with her, right?
Yes, that's what he said.
And then he said, eventually he said he did have sex with her, right?
Eventually, yes.
And you were livid about that.
Well, because of the pretenses that she said it was under.
Well, your opinion is a pretense, but she told you that she was drunk, right?
She said she was intoxicated, yes.
Right. She's 20 years old. She's not supposed to be drinking legally yet, correct?
Correct.
She can't even go in a bar, right?
No.
Like the bar, the joint that you and all your friends would hang out with, she wasn't supposed to be in there, right?
Negative.
And
No.
at some point, she even got kicked out of there, right?
I had heard that from someone.
She wasn't like a big, heavy drinker. You didn't go around getting her drunk, right? You were spending lots of time with her. And so she was not somebody who drank a lot of alcohol all the time. Fair?
Not regularly.
Okay. And she tells you she is drunk to the point of throwing up and blacking out, right?
In the message?
When she talks to you. We went over this yesterday. She called it blackout
yes.
drunk,
Yeah.
right? And yesterday, as you said, when she said she was blackout drunk, she woke up and thought something was going on with John and having sex with her, right?
She said something felt amiss, I guess.
She what?
Something felt amiss, I think she
Felt
said.
like something amiss, and then she goes to the bathroom, and as you said, women know.
Women, yeah,
Right.
that's my understanding.
Okay. I understand you haven't been there personally.
Negative.
And then she told you that she came back to your house and that something happened again in your bedroom, right?
Yes,
And she felt really bad about it, right?
I believe so.
And you wanted her to report it as a sexual assault, correct?
I didn't want her to do anything. I said, if this is what happened, then you need to report this.
Well, she told you facts, and then you told her that was a sexual assault, right?
What do you mean she told me facts?
She told you the facts about what happened.
Judge, I'm going to object, and if we need a sidebar, I'd be happy to expand.
Of course, it's the defense's job to argue for Ezra, but trying to label anything that Ezra said to Jason as a fact is far-fetched, especially when we discuss her claims against John. As Jason said earlier, Ezra continued to amend the story even after Alex died. Anytime a new detail was found or evidence that disproved her story was shown, she would simply shift the narrative, or change the details of what occurred to align with the new evidence, and pretend that she never said anything different. Even if you were to believe her claims against Hansen, she still lied to Jason enough times for him to doubt her story, and not take her word for it. This defense is not going well, not only because they have to argue for one of the most obvious liars of all time, but because this back and forth actively makes them look bad. As I stated earlier, her going back and forth with Jason about small issues makes her, the professional in this situation, look unable to handle a witness on the stand, and Jason isn't pushing back all that hard. They're both being stubborn and pedantic, but only one of them is a professional who does this for a living, apparently. It also doesn't help that her arguments are lackluster, and frankly, bad. Had her case been rock solid with evidence vindicating Ezra, this kind of back and forth would make her look like a no-nonsense attorney who would fight hard for her clients. But because her client is a fucking idiot, her arguments don't hold water, and so we get the opposite impression. The rest of the cross-examination is more of the same, and as such, I have little commentary to provide. If you've made it to this portion in the video, thank you for watching. I appreciate all the kindness you've been sending my way, given our recent uploads. If there's a story you would like to see us cover, or a casse you want more attention brought to, email us at dreading.official@gmail.com, or leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to stay safe.